Harper Audio presents Nathan's Run by John Gilstrap, performed by John Glover. The muffled whump of a distant mortar marked the beginning of the main event. Thousands of eyes tracked the skyrocket as it corkscrewed hundreds of feet into the air and disappeared into the night before erupting into a shower of red and gold glitter. An instant later, the concussion bursts detonated. People seated up front felt the noise in their chests and screamed their approval. Warren Michaels smiled in the glare of the display. Today marked the 37th year in a row that he'd done the same thing on the same day of summer. Traditions were important in raising a happy family, he thought. Stretched out on the hood of his cruiser with his wife tucked next to him and his daughters perched above on the light bar, he felt true contentment for the first time in a long while. "So, ladies, have you all had fun today?" Warren asked. "Yep, absolutely." Monique only groaned, making Warren laugh. His wife hated heat, bugs, and loud noises. That she endured this ritual year after year only proved that she loved him. "I think Brian would have really had fun today," Kathleen announced out of nowhere. Monique squeezed Warren's hand and agreed. "I think so too, sweetheart." Warren drew his wife closer, and without a word she responded with a gentle pat on his thigh. Only a dozen or so rockets into the display, Warren's pager vibrated in the pocket of his tennis shorts. Annoyed by the interruption, he brought the 2-inch box, his leash, he called it, in front of his face where he could see it. The green luminescent display showed his office number followed by 911, indicating that it was urgent. "Oh, shit," he grumbled, pulling his arm from around his wife. "What's the matter?" "I don't know yet. I just got paged. For Jed to call me during the fireworks, it can't be good." Warren scooted quickly into the front seat of his cruiser, flipped open his cellular, and punched a speed dial button. A harsh female voice answered on the third ring. "Braddock County Police, is this an emergency?" Hi, Janice. It's Michaels. What's up?" "Oh, Lieutenant, thank God you called. There's been a murder down at JDC. Sergeant Hackner said to get you down there right away. Look, I'm not on duty tonight. Isn't there someone else who can handle this?" "I don't know, sir. Sergeant Hackner was very specific. He said he wanted you." Warren sighed. What the hell, he thought. The mood had been broken anyway. "All right, Janice, but if Jed calls back in, you tell him that his lieutenant is not pleased. Also, you're going to have to send somebody to pick me up. My cruiser is completely blocked into Brookfield Park for the fireworks." He clapped the phone closed and slid out of the car to break the news to the family. It had been years since Warren had last entered the juvenile detention center. Such a depressing place. Down a short hallway, Michaels came to a small doorway bearing the label Crisis Unit. He couldn't see inside the room itself, but the flash of camera strobes gave it away as the crime scene. And the scene was gruesome. A white male, maybe 30, and dressed in the uniform of a JDC guard, lay sprawled on the floor of the tiny room, surrounded by a pool of coagulating blood that encircled his body like a crimson aura. Every surface in the room had been splashed with gore. Drips, smears, and spatters extended high onto the walls. A child-sized bloody footprint pointed out the door. Michael's mind worked to recreate the enormous struggle that had gone on in here. As Warren surveyed the scene, a cheerful and familiar voice boomed out. "Hey, Lieutenant!" Jed Hackner said from behind, clapping his boss on the shoulder. Hackner and Michaels had been classmates through the academy and back as far as junior high school. That one outranked the other spoke only of the limited availability of lieutenant slots, not of any lack of ability. Each man thought of the other as his closest friend. "Pretty disgusting scene, huh?" Hackner said. "What the hell happened in here?" "From what we've put together so far, this is Richard W. Harris, age 28. He's been employed here for the past 4.5 years as a child care supervisor." "Is that the same as a guard?" Michaels interrupted. "Yes," Hackner acknowledged with a smile, "but only to politically incorrect old people." At 37, Michaels was 8 months Hackner's senior. Jed continued. At 7 o'clock, Mr. Harris had some kind of an altercation with one of the residents, a Nathan Bailey, and assigned the kid here to the crisis unit. And is a crisis unit something like solitary confinement? Michaels interrupted again. Hackner smiled broadly. Yes, it is. Very similar indeed. From that point on, all we have is conjecture. But the bottom line is we believe that Nathan Bailey killed Ricky Harris and then escaped. Bailey is on the loose as we speak. My examination of the body shows at least 5 stab wounds to the abdomen and chest. Care to conjecture a motive? Hackner shrugged. My guess is he wanted to get the hell out of this place. Warren pointed to the security camera in the upper left rear corner of the room. Have you checked the tape? He asked. Maybe we have a movie of this whole thing. Checked it, and no, we don't. The video system is down. How long has he been dead? Can't tell for sure. My guess is about 2 hours. 2 hours? That means the kid has a 2-hour head start on us. We got a call into Old Man Peters for him to get his dogs up here, Hackner said. And we're in the process of setting up roadblocks at strategic points. You know, the whole drill. Michael sighed deeply. Well, I guess it'll have to do, won't it? Hell, if we can't track down a kid, I guess we've got a problem. 12-year-old Nathan Bailey tried to press his thin frame below the surface of the damp mulch and wedge in closer to the brick wall. Try as he might, he couldn't disappear entirely. His efforts to blend in with the surroundings only made him more aware of how much he stood out in his ill-fitting orange coveralls. Emblazoned across the back with the letters JDC. Nathan had no idea where he was. Once he was free of the JDC building, he just started running as fast as his bare feet would allow. 1,000 thoughts and pictures suddenly flooded Nathan's mind. Life sucked. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right how his dad went off to heaven and left him in hell, alone with Uncle Mark. How people treated you like shit when there wasn't a grown-up around to help you. How everything you said was a lie just because you're a kid, and every lie a grown-up told was the truth just because they're a grown-up. How sometimes you had to kill. For the first time, the enormity of what he had done came crashing down on him. He started to tremble, his breathing becoming rapid and noisy. Calm down, he commanded himself silently. He needed a plan. He also needed better shelter and proper clothes. He needed food. An idea began to take shape in his mind. By pivoting his head, he could see the length of the block. It was a nice neighborhood, not unlike his own. Well-kept houses, all brightly lit with well-kept lawns. The neighborhood was crawling with people. One house, though, stood out from the others. The place directly across the street was neither well-lit nor well-kept. The grass was too long, and only a porch light was on. A dozen or so newspapers lay scattered on the driveway. Nathan figured that the occupants must be on vacation. That meant that the house was empty, and that he could safely stay there, at least for tonight. 12 miles from Brookfield, Mark Bailey sat, Indian style, on his torn Naugahyde sofa, nursing the last 3 inches of his bottle of generic bourbon. The only light in the house emanated from the television. He didn't want to be seen, not tonight. He just wanted this dirty business with Nathan to be over and done with so he could get on with the rest of his life. Mark Bailey had done a terrible thing this night. Even so, he had felt well under control until the face of Harry Carruthers appeared on television for the teaser to the 11 o'clock news. Murder at the Juvenile Detention Center. Details at 11. Those 9 words confirmed for Mark that it was all over, that he had been granted a new lease on life, albeit at the expense of his immortal soul. He toasted to his dear departed brother, Steve, Mr. Perfect Life, Perfect Kid, holier than fucking thou, pain in the ass, Steve-O. Sorry it had to end this way, bro, but you didn't leave me much to work with. For Mark, the first priority had always been survival. He'd dealt with every bit of adversity life had handed him and moved on to conquer another day. When social services dumped Steve-O's hatchling on his doorstep, he'd first seen it as just one more turd on the shit pile that was his life. But then eventually he even turned that into opportunity, like turning straw into gold. The longer Mark lived, the better he got at beating the odds. It was just that the price kept getting harder to pay. As the opening credits for Action News at 11 flashed across the screen, Mark finished the last of his bottle. Harry Carruthers was first with the lead story. Law enforcement officials are stunned this evening by the brutal murder of a staff member at the Brookfield Juvenile Detention Center. 28-year-old child care supervisor Richard W. Harris was found slain at around 9 o'clock this evening by a fellow staff member. The suspected killer, a 12-year-old boy who subsequently escaped from the facility and is currently at large. John Oglesby is live in Brookfield with a report. John, what do we know about the details? Mark Bailey's first thought was that the bourbon had mushed his brain. What he thought he heard was simply unthinkable. The screen changed to young John Oglesby. Well, Harry, the details at this moment are still rather sketchy. Ricky Harris's body was found by another staff member in a cell occupied by a 12-year-old car thief named Nathan Bailey. An institutional photo of Nathan, full face and profile, dominated the left-hand side of the screen, while the other side displayed a smiling Ricky Harris. All we know for sure is that Nathan Bailey has escaped, and that he is the primary suspect in the murder as well. You son of a bitch, Mark hissed through clenched teeth. Son of a fucking bitch! He heaved his heavy bottle through the picture tube, instantly drenching the living room in darkness. How could this happen? How could Ricky have fucked it up so badly? Mark tried to stand, rising to all fours, but tumbled to his side like a fallen buffalo. You should have let him do it, Nathan, he moaned. The guy they send next won't be as quick. Thanks to the lessons of MacGyver, it took Nathan about 10 seconds to break into the house. He moved cautiously inside. His first destination was the refrigerator. He was starving. But the shelves were barren. No pizza, no leftovers, not even a carton of milk. From a compartment in the door, he pulled out a jar of sweet pickles. Then he froze. In the dim light of the refrigerator, he got his first good look at his hands. They were filthy, caked with dirt and grass stains. And blood. Lots and lots of blood. Ricky's blood. In an instant, his hunger disappeared, replaced with an urgent need to go to the bathroom. When he was finished, Nathan turned on a light. The image of the boy in the mirror frightened him. His eyes were dark hollows, one of them severely swollen. His blonde hair was brown with grime. And the blood. He was soaked in it. Using both hands, Nathan pulled the lapels of the coveralls apart and ripped the zipper from its stitching. More than anything in the world, he wanted out of those clothes. In the shower, he deliberately began to wash away the nightmare. Behind closed eyes, he tried to revel in the simple pleasure of the hot water, a privilege he had been so long denied. But the darkness brought demons instead. The image of Ricky Harris lurked behind Nathan's eyelids. He watched the man die all over again. Nathan saw his own hands covering the hole in Ricky's belly, trying desperately to slow down the bright red spurts, only to have them leak through his fingers. The picture stopped when Nathan opened his eyes. He tried to smile. A smile makes the saddest man a little happier, his father used to say. But had he ever felt this much sadness? God, I miss you, Nathan said in a whisper. I'm in so much trouble, Dad. Please help me. You've got to help me. The emotions Nathan had fought so long to control broke free all at once. He gave in to long, miserable sobs. Outside, a hard summer rain pounded heavily, washing away the trail of a frightened 12-year-old boy. Tell me what we know, Jed, Michaels invited, leaning back in his squeaky vinyl desk chair. It was morning again, the day after the 4th of July. Thumbing through his ever-present notebook, Hackner ticked off the failures of the past 12 hours. The searches and roadblocks didn't turn up a thing last night and created a nightmare during rush hour this morning. The rain last night obliterated any trail we might have had for the dogs. And our esteemed county prosecutor, the Honorable J. Daniel Petrelli, has caused a run on the pancake makeup market this morning, getting himself interviewed on all the local morning talk shows. Word has it that Good Morning America has a call into him for tomorrow morning. Oh, Christ, Michaels moaned. And what does Mr. Hollywood have to say to the residents of our fine community? Same old bullshit. He's going to prosecute the Bailey kid as an adult and throw his ass in jail for the rest of his life. When pressed by the reporter, he said he could not rule out the death penalty. Well, of course he couldn't. He hadn't had a chance to do a poll yet. Michaels made no attempt to hide his disdain for Petrelli. While ambitious prosecutors normally make some pretense of denying their political ambitions, Petrelli had for the past 5 years made it known to the electorate that he wanted to be the next U.S. Senator representing the Commonwealth of Virginia. The only cases he prosecuted personally were the ones that met the two-part standard of being highly publicized and sure to win. A central theme of Petrelli's campaign rhetoric had been the loss of morality among young people. With elections only 4 months away, he could not have asked for a better platform from which to pontificate. I presume that he has been true to his form and set us incompetent flatfoots up to take the fall if something goes wrong. Of course. Anything else? There's nothing good. Patrols are all looking for the kid, and we got a better picture to work with by lifting it out of his 5th grade yearbook. He handed a copy to Michaels. The boy in the picture could have stepped off the front of a cereal box. Tow-headed and athletic, he appeared not to have a care in the world. "He sure is a cute kid," Jed commented. "That cute kid murdered a fellow law enforcement officer last night. If we do our job, he won't have the chance to do it again." Nathan awoke as the room filled with the sound of a disc jockey blaring from the clock radio. He blindly slapped at the top of the radio until the noise stopped. The clock read 10 o'clock now. There had to be some good cartoons on. Nathan found the remote on the nightstand and thumbed the on button. The huge screen jumped to life with startling speed. He was greeted with a table-sized picture of himself glaring sullenly out of the screen. The screen cut to a videotape of an older man wearing a suit standing in front of the JDC building. Nathan didn't like the man's eyes. The electronic letters superimposed across the man's chest identified him as J. Daniel Petrelli, Commonwealth's attorney. "We cannot overstate the seriousness of this crime," Petrelli said, looking directly into the camera. "We believe that Nathan Bailey killed Mr. Harris. When he is caught, it is my intent at this time to prosecute the young man as an adult. If he can commit a grown-up crime, he can pay the grown-up price." "Surely you're not suggesting the death penalty?" an off-camera voice asked. Petrelli chuckled coolly and raised his hands next to his face. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's get Mr. Bailey back behind bars." "The death penalty," Nathan gasped aloud. "Jeez, that means the electric chair." Cartoons were suddenly unimportant in the extreme. He still had to find clothes and food and a way to stay ahead of the cops. Nathan searched the house and found the room of a boy who was clearly about his age. He selected underwear, socks, a Chicago Bulls t-shirt, a pair of denim shorts, and sneakers. Everything was 2 sizes too big, but they would certainly cover what needed to be covered. Nathan could feel his confidence growing, and there was a spring in his step as he re-entered the master suite. The clock radio had cycled back on, blaring a talk show. It took Nathan 5 seconds to realize that the people on the radio were talking about him, which was pretty cool at first. Then he heard what they were saying. Denise Carpenter, a black divorced mother of twin girls, had been the bitch on News Talk 990 for nearly 5 years, a transformation that was so accidental it somehow seemed ordained that the show would become a success. In October, 4 3/4 years before, She had been a traffic reporter, granted 30 seconds of airtime every half hour. The regular late-morning talent, Boss Johnny, called in that morning from the D.C. jail, where he'd been offered a guest room in return for 7 outstanding warrants for offenses ranging from failure to pay child support to assault. With only 20 minutes advance notice, Denise was told that she would get her big chance in major market radio. She was smart enough to realize an opportunity when she saw it. At the time, her daughters, Laura and Erin, were only 5, and between daycare and rent, there was barely enough cash left in any given week for food. With no notice, and facing a once-in-a-lifetime chance to make an impression, Denise had walked into the booth briskly and confidently. Years later, her then engineer and current producer, Enrique Zamora, confided in her that he'd lost $20 that day by betting that Denise would leave in tears before the end of the first commercial. Far from tearful, Denise came out of the theme song swinging. "I am not the voice you were expecting to hear this morning," she'd said, her first words ever as a disc jockey. "That voice is learning to sing the song of a jailbird. Right now, Boss Johnny's in jail downtown on a number of charges, one of which is failure to pay child support. If he's innocent, I can't wait to see his smiling face back in the booth. If he's guilty, I hope he rots in a cell with Bubba the Love Muffin teaching him things he never knew about sex." For the next 4 hours, Denise railed on about what was wrong with the social fabric of America, not hesitating to traipse on territory normally considered forbidden. Through her entire first show, the telephone lines remained jammed with callers trying to assail her positions. Denise's defining moment came when Barbara, from Arlington, Virginia, called in to tell her, "No offense, Denise, but you're really coming across as a bitch on the radio." Denise responded, "Why, thank you very much, Barbara, because you're right. But I'm not just a bitch. I'm the bitch of Washington, D.C." In an industry where a marketable identity means everything, Denise had stumbled upon a winner. By the time Boss Johnny was able to scrape together bail money, 2 days after his arrest, his job had been given away to an upstart bitch from the news staff. By the time Nathan listened to her for the first time in the bedroom of a strange house, Denise was being heard on 327 stations across the country, and was earning well into 7 figures. During her monologue at the beginning of the show that morning, the bitch had railed against the state of the youth of America, citing as an example of the decaying moral fabric the local Washington story of a 12-year-old boy who'd escaped from prison after killing a guard. "The prosecutor on this case says he's going to try this kid as an adult, and I think that's great. How many times do you hear stories of gang killings and drive-by killings only to find out that the killing is being done by pint-sized monsters who are 12, 13, 14-year-olds? I, for one, am tired of hearing it. I, for one, am prepared to stand up and say, man or woman, underage or not, if you intentionally take the life of another human being, I don't want you as part of my society. I want you in prison for the rest of your life, or until you're old enough to be strapped down in one of those nice little electric chairs." The phones went nuts, every light blinking urgently by the time she was done with her tirade. Promising to talk to the listeners on hold as soon as she came back, the bitch went into commercials. "Half the calls want to hang the kid, the other half want to hang you," Enrique said into Denise's headset. She smiled stunningly. To Enrique, everything that Denise did was stunning. Fans who knew Denise only from her voice invariably commented when they met her on how beautiful she was, and privately how surprised they were. "Okay, Denise," Enrique said. "We're coming out of commercial in 20 seconds. The bitch took 3 calls before the first break. None of them thought that Nathan should be treated differently than any other criminal. The time had come, the callers agreed, when people had to take responsibility for their actions, whether good or bad. The courts had gone way too far in protecting the rights of the bad guys at the expense of the good guys. Denise could not have agreed more. Nathan sat on the edge of the big bed, listening to a long string of grown-up strangers passing judgment on him. How could they say those things? They weren't there. They didn't feel Ricky's hands around their throats. They didn't know, they probably didn't even care, that if he hadn't killed Ricky, then Ricky would have killed him. No one had even heard his side of the story. But he could change that, couldn't he? All he had to do was pick up the telephone and call. He dialed and brought the phone to his ear to hear an immediate busy signal. He dialed the number again, and again. On his 9th try, the phone on the other end began to ring. After what seemed to be 100 rings, someone picked up on the other end. "You've reached the bitch line," the voice said. "What do you want to talk about?" I want to talk about this, Nathan Bailey thing." "Are you a kid? The bitch doesn't talk to kids." "I think she'll want to talk to me. I'm Nathan Bailey." When Enrique said a kid claiming to be Nathan Bailey was on the phone, Denise completely lost her train of thought for a moment. If it were true, they could be on the verge of some terrific radio. Well, now it would appear that we have a celebrity on the line, assuming that my producer is telling the truth. She pushed the button numbered 6. "Nathan Bailey, are you there?" "Yes, ma'am," said a small but strong voice from the other end. There was determination in the boy's husky voice. For years, Denise had prided herself in her ability to recognize personality traits just from listening to people's voices. This was the voice of someone who was honest. Denise instantly began to second-guess her conclusions about Nathan. Nathan's nervousness disappeared as soon as he started talking. "Whatever happened to being innocent until proven guilty?" he demanded. "Whatever happened to the sanctity of human life?" Denise shot back. "Don't you think that killing is wrong?" "Of course I do, but it's no wronger than getting killed. I don't remember you being there last night. You don't have any idea what went on in there." "Did you kill the guard?" Nathan's voice rose in volume and pitch with his frustration. "Yes, but—" Denise cut him off. "No buts, Nathan. Stop right there. You killed the guard. What more is there to know? Why don't you hang up the phone right now and turn yourself into the police?" "I can't go back," Nathan said matter-of-factly. "If I go back, they'll just hurt me again. Or kill me. That's what Ricky was trying to do." Denise paused, caught off guard. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You say that the guard was trying to kill you?" "Yes, ma'am." "And why would that be?" "How the hell should I know?" "Kids shouldn't cuss on the radio." "Oh, sure. You're a fine one to talk. You can't even say your name without cussing." Denise laughed. "All right, Nathan. Let's start over again. You say in essence that you killed the guard in self-defense. Why don't you tell us what actually happened last night?" For the next 18 minutes, Nathan unraveled his side of the story for millions of radio listeners from coast to coast. Denise interrupted only 3 times to clarify what he was saying, but otherwise sat silently. By the time the boy was done, the bitch was 12 commercials behind, but even the sponsors wouldn't complain. This was great radio. At around 7 o'clock that night, Ricky Harris entered the detention center's rec hall, walked directly over to Nathan, and lifted him out of the chair by his ear. "Come with me, you little shit," he said. Nathan yelped. "Ow! What'd I do?" "You know what you did," Ricky hissed, his breath smelling of booze and cigarettes. He yanked Nathan toward the crisis unit. "A little time in the unit will do you good." The crisis unit had a reputation among the residents as a place of punishment. Nathan was terrified. He struggled only to be dragged more harshly down the short hallway. Ricky one-handed the lock and half-shoved, half-tossed Nathan into the tiny cell. The crisis unit was surprisingly like Nathan's own quarters, though about half the size, with a metal cot and thin mattress on one side of the room, and a combination toilet and sink on the other. "Take off your shoes and hand them to me," Ricky commanded, "and the socks." "But it's cold in here." Ricky just glared, and Nathan handed them over. Then Ricky left, abruptly, locking the door behind him. Nathan listened to the footsteps disappear down the hall. Cold, confused, and miserable, Nathan drew his legs up and rested his forehead on his knees, forcing himself to regain his composure. He lay on his side and tried to make his feet disappear into his coveralls for warmth. The sound of a key in the lock awoke Nathan with a start. The door moved slowly inward, revealing Ricky standing alone in the doorway. He was drunk, or stoned. Nathan could tell by the empty look in his eyes. It was the look that always preceded the beatings from Uncle Mark. Ricky was hiding something in his right hand, keeping it just out of sight behind his back. Nathan knew something was going to happen. For the first time in his life, he felt that his life was threatened, and he found himself crouched on his cot, braced for battle. While he wasn't much of a fighter, something in Ricky's face told him that this would be the fight of his life, for his life. Nathan looked desperately for a way to run. But the cell was too small, and Ricky was so big that there was no way to get around him. Then he saw the knife. If Ricky had acted quickly and just lashed out at Nathan, it would have ended right there. But Ricky had chosen drama over efficiency, waving the knife around in front of Nathan's face. Nathan didn't hesitate. Bracing his back against the wall, he shot his leg straight out, driving his heel squarely into Ricky's testicles. Ricky staggered a half step, then slumped to his knees. Nathan attempted to vault over Ricky's stooped shoulders, but the cot moved as he pushed off, and he only made it halfway, his knees contacting Ricky's head and making them both tumble to the ground. "I'm gonna cut your fucking head off," Ricky hissed. The knife came down at Nathan in a wide, powerful arc from above. Nathan deflected the blow and lunged at Ricky's knife hand with his teeth. He bit down as hard as he could, ignoring the taste of the blood. Ricky howled and let go of the knife, dropping it to the floor. "God damn it!" In one smooth motion, Ricky swung Nathan close, then drove a piston-like punch into the boy's right eye. Behind his eyes, Nathan felt an explosion in his brain, and he tumbled to the floor. For a full 5 seconds, they just stared at each other, allowing some of the agony to drain from their bodies. Then together, they eyed the knife on the floor, and together they lunged for it. Nathan had told himself 1,000,000 times, a sober kid can outmaneuver a drunk adult any day of the week, and the 4th of July was no exception. He snatched the knife from the tile and whirled around in a backhanded slashing motion designed to make Ricky jump back. Ricky seemed to watch dumbly as the blade came around in a horizontal arc and buried itself to the hilt in his abdomen. Nathan felt as shocked as Ricky looked as the knife drove itself home. Ricky fell straight back like a tree. "I'm sorry," Nathan shouted. "Oh God, Ricky, I'm sorry." Ricky didn't respond. He just stared at the ceiling. His hands gently massaged the handle of the knife as though he were thinking of pulling it out but couldn't muster the courage. Nathan didn't know what to do. Maybe he should help him and pull it out for him. He moved closer to the knife, closed his eyes, and pulled it out. As the knife pulled clear of the wound, Nathan was instantly splashed with a torrent of blood pumping from the gaping wound. Oh God! Instinctively, Nathan tried to cover the hole with his 2 hands, but it was no use. Out of nowhere, Ricky's hand shot up to Nathan's throat and shut off his air supply. Ricky's eyes showed murder. He was going to die, and he was going to take Nathan with him. The knife. It was still on the floor. Nathan found the blade on the floor, an inch from his knee. This time, it would be no accident. Nathan mustered all the strength he had left to straight-arm the knife into Ricky's chest. He struck over and over again, each impact making a grotesque slurping sound. After the second thrust, Ricky's grip relaxed a little, once again allowing air and blood to flow to Nathan's brain. After the 5th, Ricky let go completely, and with a last rattling breath, he died. Nathan panicked. The crisis unit looked like a house of horrors. A supervisor was dead, and they were going to blame him. Sure as hell, there would be nothing that he'd be able to say to anyone to make them believe that Ricky had started it. Nathan had to get the hell out of the juvenile detention center. He had to run fast, run hard, and run now. Tiptoeing through the river of gore on the floor, Nathan pulled the key ring off Ricky's belt and darted out of the room, locking the door behind him. From there, it was easy. "And so I started running," Nathan finished. He was lying on his stomach now, resting on his elbows. "So are you all right?" Denise asked, genuine concern evident in her voice. "I guess so. My eye hurts some, but other than that, I think I'm okay." "Do you have any idea at all why the supervisor would want to kill you?" As unbelievable as the kid's story was, Denise believed him. "Yeah, I think he was crazy. He was drunk. He was stoned. Grown-ups always get like that when they drink." "Grown-ups like whom?" Denise prodded, sensing a new wrinkle to this extraordinary saga. "Like your father?" "No." Nathan's reply was emphatic. "My dad was a good man. He'd never drink or hit anyone." "What about your mother?" His voice softened. "I never met my mom. She died when I was just a baby." "So did anyone in your life beat you?" "I don't want to talk about that," Nathan replied curtly. "Why not? It might help if people understood some of what you've gone through." "Bull. People want to think that everybody lives like those perfect families on TV. They can yell and scream and hit their kid so long as the kid keeps quiet. But if he hits back or tries to leave, they call you incorrigible and throw your butt in jail." "Is that how you ended up in jail? Did you fight back?" "No, I didn't hit anybody back. I stole a car, but I don't want to talk about that either." "So what's the end of the story?" Denise asked. "What are you going to do next? You can't just keep running." "Why not? When I was in juvie, I did everything I was supposed to do and got the crap beat out of me. The supervisor tries to kill me. I defend myself, and the people who listen to your show call me a murderer and want to put me in the electric chair. Nobody really—" His voice caught in his throat. He fell silent. "Cares?" Denise helped. Nathan's lower lip was trembling now, and he hated himself for losing control on national radio. "Yes," he whispered. Denise's eyes welled up unexpectedly at the sound of the tiny voice. "You're frightened, aren't you, honey?" "I've got to go," he croaked. He hung up. "Well," Denise said at length, "that was something. Nathan, if you're still listening, we wish you all the luck in the world, however this turns out. Sounds to me like maybe you're due for some. I think everybody needs a minute or two to regain their composure. We'll be right back after these messages." 5 seconds after the radio conversation ended, Petrelli was railing at Warren Michaels over the phone. "That lying son of a bitch is pandering for public sympathy. The issue of whether or not he was treated well in juvie has no bearing on this case whatsoever. What matters is that he escaped from a detention facility and he killed a supervisor to do it." This tantrum, like so many others Petrelli had unleashed against Michaels over the years, was bullshit. Warren knew that Petrelli couldn't have cared less about an escapee on the street or about the deaths of 100 supervisors. Petrelli went on. "So, listen to this carefully, Lieutenant Michaels, because I will only say it once. I expect you to apprehend Nathan Bailey by this afternoon at the latest, and I don't want to hear any excuses." "All right, J. Daniel, I've listened carefully," Warren said in measured tones. "Here's how I see it. You just couldn't wait to open your big mouth this morning and make wholly unjustified comments to the press. If you'd have waited for us to collect evidence before you rested your case, you wouldn't be looking like such an asshole now. Save your speeches for the press, Jay, and stay off my phone." He slammed the receiver onto the cradle. Damn, that felt good. "You feel better?" When Michaels looked up, he saw Jed Hackner's form filling the doorway. "Talking to your buddy Petrelli?" he asked. "You got it. The asshole's beginning to panic after Nathan Bailey's radio debut. Did you hear it?" Hackner nodded. "Yeah, it sounded pretty convincing to me." "I don't suppose you have any good news for me," Michael said. Well, I don't know if it's good or not, but it certainly is interesting. First of all, we haven't been able to contact the kid's uncle and ex-guardian, Mark Bailey. You think he helped in the escape? Not likely. There's not a lot of love lost between the two of them. Give me the lowdown. Hackner removed the notebook from his pocket and started reading. This all comes from the juvie files. For the first 10 years of his life, Nathan Bailey was raised by his father. His mother died when he was just a baby. Daddy was a lawyer with lots of bucks, but not much in the way of estate planning. 2 years ago, Daddy's car got whacked by a train, killing him. With no provisions for who was going to take care of Nathan, custody went to Uncle Mark. Apparently Mark thought that the kid would be supported by a trust fund, but Daddy had just sunk $2+ million into his practice, secured against every asset he owned. By the time his estate cleared probate, there was nothing left. Needless to say, Uncle Mark was not a happy camper. Social services was out to the house a half-dozen times over the year Nathan was there, responding mostly to neighbor complaints, but nothing ever came of it. Finally, about a year ago, Nathan stole his uncle's car, claiming that it was the only way he could get far enough away from this son of a bitch. Of course, Uncle Mark pressed charges. He told the court, and I quote, "A little time in prison never hurt anyone." Nice guy, Michael snorted. No, he's not, Jed corrected, very serious. Mark Bailey knows whereof he speaks, having logged 7 years at Leavenworth for burning down an officers' club in Texas. In the 8 years he's been in the county, he's had 3 DWIs, 2 disorderly conducts, and an assault and battery charge that was dropped when the victim had a change of heart about testifying. He's also logged about 1 million bar fights, almost all of them on the losing end. Michaels was incredulous. Did social services know about all this when they assigned custody to him? Hackner shrugged. I guess so, but to be honest, there really wasn't much of a choice. It was either Uncle Mark or foster care. And it gets worse. Nathan, who just turned 12, was shipped up to Brookfield and put in the general population. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday night, he's gang-raped with a broom handle and has to spend a week in the infirmary. Michaels winced and held up his hand. That's enough. I don't want to hear any more. Anything else? Well, it turns out we got a videotape after all. I thought the camera was broken. The camera in the crisis unit was, but we were able to catch Master Bailey exiting the back door. You want to see the tape? I've got it set up in the conference room. Both men rose together, Michaels following Hackner out of the office. So how come the only cameras that weren't working were the ones we needed to see? Michaels asked. Hackner shrugged. Pretty convenient, isn't it? I want you to look into that angle, okay, Jed? I want to know if somebody helped him. Start with the uncle. Hackner agreed. I've already got Tompkins trolling that line. They entered the conference room, and with the press of a button, the image on the TV screen wiggled and danced. In the fuzzy black and white shadows typical of security cameras, Michaels watched as a boy appeared. He looked frightened. His movements were simultaneously quick and hesitant. He was barefoot, and his clothes were smeared with his victim's blood. As he watched, Michael's heart stopped beating for just the briefest of moments. The expression in Nathan's eyes was one he had seen before. Freeze the tape. Nathan's eyes spoke of fear and uncertainty. Michaels had seen that very expression dozens of times from the face of another insecure, introverted 12-year-old who'd once depended upon him for so much, but now was silent forever. Michaels felt suddenly light-headed and lowered himself clumsily into a chair at the conference table. His face was drained of color. Hackner reached out to help his friend into the chair. My God, Warren, are you all right? His eyes never left the screen. His throat was thick. Look at his face, Jed. Look. He's got Brian's eyes. Jed saw it too. The likeness was remarkable. though not so much in the eyes as in the expression. "I am so sorry, Warren," Hackner said. "I'll turn it off." "No, don't," Michael said firmly, having regained his composure. "Jesus, Jed, God, I thought I was past it. I can't keep reacting like that. I'm okay." With the briefest movement of his head, Michael's was all business again. Heading back toward his office, he said, "One thing I want you to check up on, Jed, is the telephone records to that radio show. I want you to tap into that computer and find out the number where that call originated. We'll trace it and get the kid back home." We'll need a court order," Jed said. "We won't stand a chance against a radio station." "Get them to volunteer the information," Warren suggested without breaking his stride. "Be persuasive. We don't have a clue where this kid went, so don't tell me what we can't do until we've at least tried, okay?" Jed nodded and turned and left without saying a word. Patrolman Harold Tompkins of the Braddock County Police Department was determined to be noticed. After 5 years of rotating shifts, traffic stops, and every conceivable piece of grunt work, he was ready to try some real police work. He needed an opportunity to shine on the job, the big success. He needed to find just the right piece of evidence or uncover just the right lead to break a big case. When Sergeant Hackner came to him that morning with the task of tracking down Nathan Bailey's location through the telephone records, he knew this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Court orders took forever, and they were well outside of Harry's power to obtain. Harry needed to go to the source. He needed to talk the owners of those telephone records, the bitch and her production staff, into releasing the records to his custody. He just had to be persuasive. He briefly considered a soft-pedaled altruistic approach, but rejected it as too wimpy. Instead, he settled on the forceful approach. If he leaned on them hard enough and played the obstruction of justice card just right, they'd cave in. As soon as the commercial started, Enrique alerted Denise. "I've got a cop on the phone who wants to use our telephone records to trace down Nathan's call." "Hell no," Denise responded quickly. "You tell him that our telephone records are off limits. We're talking a serious First Amendment issue here." "Well, he says he's going to bring us up on obstruction of justice charges if we don't cooperate." "Oh, really? Well, patch him through to my board. We'll put him on the air when we come out of commercials. What's his name?" "Tompkins." At her cue from Enrique, Denise opened her microphone. "Welcome back, America, to this most unusual show this morning. The interest in Nathan Bailey just continues to grow. On the line with us now is a police officer from Braddock County, Virginia, who's threatening to send my staff and me to prison over all of this. Officer Tompkins, this is the bitch, and you're on the air." A tentative voice said, "Hello? Officer Tompkins?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Now, I understand you want to throw me in jail. What gives?" The voice stammered badly on the other end. Denise loved it. Am I on the radio?" "You called a radio station, mister. That generally gets you on the radio. So, why do you want to toss me in the hoosgow?" I'm sorry, but I think we need to discuss this in private. I didn't call to get put on the air." "I am sure you didn't. According to my producer, you want to use this program's telephone records to find out where Nathan Bailey was calling from this morning. Is that correct?" "Well, I suppose so." He sounded deliciously evasive. "You suppose so? I'll interpret that as a yes. And now I'll give you an answer that needs no interpretation. You can have those records when hell freezes over, or when you have a court order." There's really no need to be so angry?" Denise interrupted again. "Do you also suppose that you told my producer that if he didn't let you rummage through our records, you'd charge us with obstruction of justice?" Tompkins sounded suddenly dejected, like he'd been caught in the act of doing something wrong. I think I might have mentioned that. Whoops, sorry to interrupt again, but that sounded like another yes. Let me get this straight, Officer Tompkins. You're going to charge me with the crime for exercising my First Amendment rights? Does that seem reasonable to you? Or maybe you were just bluffing, using scare tactics to get what you want, so you don't have to go through the proper channels mandated by law? Boy, they didn't call her the bitch for nothing. Without ever completing a sentence, Tompkins had made a fool not only of himself, but of his entire department, in front of millions of people. He could see his career unraveling before his eyes. He abruptly hung up. Denise heard the click and smiled slyly to Enrique. He hung up. She laughed into the mic. Well, hanging up's not really an answer, I guess, but I certainly think there's a message there. Don't you? Lyle Pointer liked to think of himself as the hitman. At 5'11", 180 pounds, his appearance was anything but intimidating, so people assumed because of his size that he could be pushed around. Few made that assumption more than once. Pointer had slowly but surely earned respect, and he had done that through sheer brutality. His first job for Mr. Slater had been to deliver a message to a punk drug dealer who'd opened up shop on the wrong turf. It was Pointer's job to make sure that the young man would leave Washington forever, and to send a message to would-be intruders that they should never, ever set foot on Slater ground. Pointer's solution sent shockwaves through the Washington underworld. Abducting the young man at gunpoint, Pointer handcuffed him to a dumpster, beat him unconscious, and cut off his upper lip with a razor blade. When the teenager came to his senses, Pointer doused the dealer's genitals with gasoline and struck a match. After letting the fire burn for half a minute, he extinguished it with a shovelful of dirt. The notoriety that followed this job served Pointer well and set a precedent for what was expected from him in the future. Each job was a new test of his resourcefulness, but a single misstep could easily cost him everything he'd struggled so long to build, including his life. As appreciative as Mr. Slater was of a job well done, he wouldn't tolerate a fuck-up. Pointer often heard his boss say that every man deserved a second chance, but that no one deserved a third. On this day, Pointer was grateful for the second chance. He needed it. As he sped through the Virginia countryside en route to his meeting, Pointer could barely control his rage. This whole business with Mark Bailey and his nephew was fucking out of control. He never should have listened to Bailey's plan in the first place, but it was so simple. An inside job, big man, little boy, small room. How the fuck could they screw it up? It was only because of Pointer's loyalty and history of good work that Mr. Slater had granted him his second chance. "By the time this is over," Mr. Slater had said with grave seriousness, "one of you will be dead, Lyle." Mr. Slater was not a man given to hyperbole. So Pointer took control of this thing personally. Effective this morning. His meeting with Mark Bailey was to extract his pound of flesh and gallon of blood. The son of a bitch needed to learn not to make promises he couldn't keep. 30 minutes earlier, Mark Bailey had carefully eased his Bronco into a remote parking space at the Hillbilly Tavern. At just after noon, he was still too hungover to be moving, let alone driving. Certain that at any second his window and his head would be shattered by a rifle bullet, he carefully scanned the area with his eyes. "Come on, Mark," he told himself. "They can't kill you. At least not yet. Without you, they've got nothing." Ever since Pointer's call this morning, he'd been repeating this sentence over and over again. The Hillbilly Tavern was the kind of place that could only exist in the rural Virginia countryside. Home to thousands of unspeakable secrets and schemes, it was the kind of place where a person with the guts to enter could discuss anything with anyone, with the full knowledge that nothing said would ever be repeated. Taking a deep breath, Mark turned the knob on the door and entered. The transition from searing sunshine to near darkness left him momentarily blind. "Who the fuck are you?" A gravelly voice barked from behind the shadows. "My name's Bailey. I'm here to meet a man named Pointer," Mark replied. "You heard of him?" The silence said that he had. "God damn it!" the voice growled. "Either come in or get the fuck out. I don't like people standing in my doorway." Mark shut the door behind him and edged his way toward a table in the corner. He ordered a beer, hoping that the hair of the dog would take the edge off his hangover. When Lyle Pointer finally entered the Hillbilly Tavern, the eyes of the regulars looked up just long enough to look away. No one said anything. Pointer walked directly over to Mark's table in the corner and took the seat immediately next to him, not across from him as Mark had expected. It was the seating arrangement typical of a date, not of a business meeting. But then Mark had no way of knowing just how intimate an act of true intimidation could be. For a long moment, Pointer stared at Mark. He said, "You broke your promise to me. You promised me that you could handle this thing, and then you fucked it up." Sweat beaded on Mark's forehead. Pointer continued, "I talked to Mr. Slater this morning, and he wasn't pleased. He threatened me, Mark, because I was stupid enough to believe that you could pull off a foolproof plan to kill a kid inside a concrete fucking room. Look, Pointer, I can explain," Mark attempted to say. Pointer cut him off. "I don't want an explanation from you. Obviously, you weren't there. Let me guess. You poured yourself into a bottle last night, didn't you?" He nodded. Pointer took a deep breath and let it out noisily. "So, that's the thanks I get, huh? I go to bat for you, keep you from getting your throat cut, and the best you can do is subcontract your work to some incompetent prison guard so you can drown yourself in booze. Does that seem fair to you, Mark?" Mark said, "No." What he didn't say, they both knew already. The only reason that Pointer had gone to bat for him was to protect the $200,000 he stood to make in the deal, unbeknownst to the angry Mr. Slater. "Well, Mark, it doesn't seem fair to me either. But you know what? I did it for you again. Mr. Slater's first solution to this little problem was for me to cut out your liver and stuff it down your throat. He told me that he didn't care about the $500,000. He told me that the honor and dignity of his name were at stake now, and that the only thing that mattered was killing you." Mark's hangover flooded back into his brain. His stomach churned. I talked him into one more try. So, here's where it stands. Asshole. If your nephew dies and we get our money, you live. Otherwise, you're dead. I'll take care of whacking the kid. Your job is to wait for the papers from your lawyer. In the long pause that followed, Mark knew there was something else coming. There's one more matter we need to discuss. Two, actually. First, you're a minority shareholder in your inheritance now. Mr. Slater's share went up to $2 million. Plus, I'm going to add another $300,000 to let you live. Add to that another $200,000 that you already owe me personally, and that makes your total about $2.5 million. What's left is yours. An objection formed in Mark's throat, but he swallowed it. I can live with that, he said, wincing at the unintentional pun. Pointer laughed. I bet you can. Now, that leaves us with one more bit of business. You see, Mark, I have a reputation to consider, too. And the simple fact of the matter is that I can't afford to let you go out of here without fucking you up. He stood, and as he did, he smoothly and slowly withdrew a pistol, thumbed the hammer back, and placed the muzzle an inch from Mark's right eye. "Are you right-handed or left-handed?" he asked. Left," Mark stammered. Pointer pulled a pen and a scrap of paper from an inside pocket and handed them over to Mark. "Here," he said. "Let me see your signature here." Mark's shoulders sagged visibly as he realized that his lie was transparent. "I'm sorry, Pointer," he pleaded. "I made a mistake. Actually, I'm right-handed." "Put your right hand on the table," Pointer commanded. As he spoke, something changed behind his eyes. Even in the darkness of the tavern, Mark could see it. It was a chilling, calculating coldness. They were the eyes of evil. Mark was vaguely aware that he had just pissed all over himself. His hand shook violently, out of control, as he complied with the orders and placed his hand on the table. "These are the rules," Pointer explained. "If you make a sound, I'll pull the trigger. No matter how bad it hurts, you just sit there quietly for once in your life and be a man. You understand?" Mark was openly sobbing now. Tears cascaded down his cheeks, but there was no sound. Pointer wrapped his fist around the forefinger on Mark's right hand and pressed his thumb firmly at the digit's base, halfway between the second and third knuckle. After about 5 seconds, Mark's second knuckle dislocated with a soft pop. Lights danced before his eyes, and he felt his gorge rise in his throat, but he swallowed it back down, and he didn't make a sound. 10 seconds later, the finger broke mid-shaft under Pointer's thumb. Mark's whole body jumped as pain shot like a spike all the way to his shoulder, causing him to bite through his lower lip. When Pointer let go, Mark's finger stuck straight up at the break like a fleshy flagpole. Proud that he had made no noise, and that he was still alive as a result, he recovered his mangled hand and cradled it like a baby in the crook of his left elbow. Then he noticed that the gun hadn't moved. "I'm sorry, Mark," Pointer said, the grin still there. "But we're not done yet. The first finger was for fucking up. Now we've got to break one for telling me you were left-handed. Now put your hand back on the table." Mark's hand had already swollen to twice its normal size, as blood poured internally from ruptured vessels. Movement of any sort was excruciating, but the mental agony of going through this one more time was almost more than he could bear. He hoped he would pass out, but of course no such thing happened. This time Pointer made it easy, grabbing Mark's pinky and wrenching it quickly backwards and sideways, nearly severing the finger at its root. This time Mark howled in agony, unable to control his voice, and he slipped from his chair down onto the filthy floor. Pointer considered shooting him on principle, but the son of a bitch had held out longer than he would have thought. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Bailey. I'll call you when we need you." After hanging up with the bitch, Nathan headed downstairs looking for something to eat. A quick look in the mudroom revealed a freezer full of his favorite foods. After eating, he knew that his next priority should be putting distance between himself and the JDC. The morning news shows had shown pictures of search parties and roadblocks all looking for him. To get away, he knew walking wouldn't do, but there had to be another solution. Why couldn't he drive? A year ago, Nathan had made it nearly 25 miles in Uncle Mark's truck before the cop pulled him over, and that was in the middle of the day when everybody noticed a kid driving a car. If he could do his traveling at night and avoid the major roads with their roadblocks, He might just be able to drive himself right out of the country. When he looked in the huge garage, he found a brand-new, cherry-red BMW convertible, the coolest-looking car on the street. The keys were on a hook mounted on the wall. A grin crossed Nathan's face. This could work. It had to. Dr. Tad Baker frowned as he slipped a set of X-rays into the clips on the viewer. The ghostly white hand on the screen before him was more than just broken. It had been mangled. The pain must have been excruciating, Tad thought. Putting on his best clinician's face, Dr. Tad, as he was called by his staff, slid back the curtain and addressed for the first time the occupant of bed 4. Good afternoon, Mr. Bailey. I'm Dr. Baker. I see by your chart that you've had an accident. Hand injury, huh? The intense throbbing in Mark's hand had transported itself all the way back to his shoulder blades now, and light-hearted conversation was no longer in his repertoire. It really hurts, Doc, he said. I bet it does. How did it happen? I was working on the brakes on my car when the jack slipped, he explained. Tad winced at the thought. You didn't have it up on blocks, huh? No, I was too stupid to do that, Mark said. Tad smiled noncommittally, knowing right away that the story was a lie. The fingers were still on the hand, a highly unusual outcome for that particular scenario, and the angulation of the fractures was all wrong. In Tad's judgment, Mark Bailey's fingers had been broken intentionally by someone who seemed talented at doing such things. This judgment was not something he could prove, however, nor could he ignore his suspicions. Well, here's what we're going to do with that hand, Tad explained. We're going to put you under a light general anesthetic, and we're going to have to set the bones. So you're going to have to knock me out? Mark asked. There was an edge of hope to his voice. Tad nodded. It'd be pretty tough getting bones set any other way. It was time to push. Why do you suppose only 2 fingers got broken instead of your whole hand? Mark was in too deep to change his story now, so he said, I have no idea. It's just lucky, I guess. Tad's eyes probed Mark's face for the truth. It's interesting, too, that the fractures angulate in different directions. If I didn't know better, I'd swear that your hand was deliberately broken. You don't think I'm lying to you, do you? Tad stared just long enough to convey his true thoughts. Of course not. No sane person would lie to his doctor. To do that would just delay recovery. Then he left the room. Finally, it was time for Nathan to leave. Partly because he had been raised right, as his dad used to say, but mostly out of sheer boredom, he had laundered the sheets from the master bedroom. It wasn't right to leave a place without making the bed. He couldn't bring himself to do anything with the JDC jumpsuit, however, which still lay where he had shed it on the floor of the hall bathroom. Nathan put the finishing touches on his note to the Nicholsons. He'd found his host's name on a magazine and walked from the kitchen into the garage. He slipped the car into reverse down the driveway, then into drive. The Beamer lurched forward to the end of the street, then lurched to a stop at the stop sign, flinging Nathan against his seatbelt. After a while, he felt in control of the vehicle. As he neared an intersection, traffic slowed considerably, and in the distance he could see that the night was alive with the strobes and light bars of emergency vehicles. He thought about just turning around, but there was no way to cross the median without drawing all kinds of suspicion. It was probably just a traffic accident anyway. But it was a roadblock. Cops in brown uniforms were stopping every 4th or 5th car to shine a flashlight around and talk to the driver. Nathan felt his heart gain speed, and he gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his fingers go numb. Oh God, he prayed aloud. Please, don't let them stop me." There seemed to be no pattern. The cops just stopped cars at random. To Nathan's steadily mounting horror, the cop stopped the car right in front of him. The officer seemed particularly interested in the vehicle, spending a long time shining the light carefully around the interior of the back seat. Then the cop opened the driver's door and motioned for him to step out, motioning for his partner in the other lane to come over and help. The driver of the car stepped out and placed his hands on the roof of the car. As the cop reached for his handcuffs with one hand, he motioned with the other for Nathan to drive around. There was some very brief eye contact, but whatever recognition there may have been on the part of the cop quickly evaporated when his prisoner started to struggle, and they both tumbled to the ground. Nathan watched the brawl for a moment in his side view mirror. It took a couple of miles of driving for Nathan to realize that he'd made it. He felt nearly dizzy with a sense of pride and accomplishment. He'd beaten them again. When Monique Michaels rolled over to spoon up with her husband, she noticed he was gone, and she was instantly wide awake. The digital clock on her nightstand read 3:21. Leaning up on her elbow, she listened for sounds, but the house was silent. She was worried about Warren. It was happening again, she knew. He was shutting them out. Something was chewing up her husband's insides, and rather than sharing it with her, or leaning on her for support, he was falling back into his macho suffer-in-silence bravado. Before she could control it, old anger bubbled up again from deep within. It had been 9 months since their son, Brian, had been killed on his newspaper route, but only 2 since Warren had started to deal with it. In between, Monique and the girls had been stranded alone, left to deal with unspeakable grief and virtual silence. Normally, when Warren couldn't sleep, he simply went downstairs to watch TV until he faded off. But tonight he wasn't there. "Warren?" she said softly. "Where are you?" No answer. Now she was really concerned. Then she saw movement on the front porch and noticed the door was ajar. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked as she glided silently out onto the porch to join him. "I'm fine," he assured her. "I've just got a lot on my mind." He was anything but fine, and Monique could tell. "Like what?" she probed as she sat down in a rocker next to his. Work stuff, really. There's nothing for you to be concerned about. Why don't you go back to bed? I just need to work through some things." "Tell me what's going on in there." She tapped his temple with her forefinger. "You promised you'd never shut me out again." Warren inhaled deeply. I guess I'm having some problems keeping this Nathan Bailey thing in perspective." His voice sounded weak and a little shaky. He told her of the video and of Nathan's transient likeness to Brian. So that was it. Monique hugged him as best she could from a different chair. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry," she soothed. "I know how much you miss him, but all the kids that age look alike sometimes." He forced a chuckle. "I guess, but it makes it tough to throw him in jail." "But it's your job. You said yourself—" "I know what I said, Monique," he barked, much more harshly than he would have wanted. "You don't know the whole story. You don't know what his life has been like. In the past 2 years, he's lost everything." "So have I," he didn't say. Monique let the silence that followed linger in the humid night air. Promises aside, this was how Warren worked out his problems. He guarded his pain the way a gambler hides a losing hand. As long as no one could peek at the cards, he could bluff forever. On that day in October, when Brian was stolen from their lives by a drunk teenager in a crush of twisted steel and aluminum, Warren's personality changed. He went through all the motions of life, but something was gone, like a table lamp, perhaps, with a 25-watt bulb where a 60-watter belonged. At first he withdrew completely, grieving in silence while he made a great show of helping others cope. When the driver was convicted as an adult of voluntary manslaughter and sent to the state prison in Richmond, Warren began to show an interest again in the family. He told Monique one night that justice had been done, and now he could begin to put all this behind him. But he'd never been the same, and they both knew it. "It's just not fair," he said after a very long time. Together as a couple, yet alone with their thoughts, they sat in silence on the front porch for more than an hour. Monique held Warren's hand and secretly watched as tears balanced themselves on the edge of his eyelids and rolled down his stubby cheeks. He said nothing, and he made no move to wipe them away. By 4:15, Nathan was somewhere between Harrisburg and Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The Beamer's gas gauge was nudging empty when he pulled off the highway and headed toward what appeared to be a residential area. A sign on the telephone pole told him that Little Rocky Creek was selling single-family homes from the low 180s just down the road. "Little Rocky Creek it is," he announced to the car. It was a new housing development, and he began a tour of the neighborhood. His attention was drawn to one house that looked conspicuously empty. To confirm his suspicion, he got out and tiptoed up to the garage door. By standing on the metal handles, he could peer through the small paned windows into the darkness of the garage. Just as he'd hoped, there was an open spot. Better yet, there was a second car still there. A Honda, it appeared. "Yes!" he cheered silently. After making a mental note of the house number, 4120, he jogged back to the Beamer and drove away. The first order of business was to ditch the car. He remembered passing a church just before turning into the development that would suit the task perfectly. As he parked the Beamer in the church lot, the eastern sky was already beginning to burn red. It took him 45 minutes to make the trek back to Little Rocky Creek. To get to 4120, he'd have to walk in the open a short way. Nathan decided it was time to be bold. He straightened his shoulders, combed his hair with his fingernails, and just walked out of the woods, looking for all the world like he belonged there. Little Rocky Creek was turning out to be a terrific place to live, Todd Briscoe was thinking as he drove to work that morning. The neighbors all knew each other, and everyone seemed to be at the same stages of their lives, young professionals struggling to establish themselves. "Who's that?" A boy, maybe 12, 13 years old, was crossing the street in his direction. The face looked vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place it. He was a good-looking kid, long and thin, with disheveled blonde hair, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made Todd think he was up to no good. By the time Nathan saw the car approach, there was nothing he could do. He didn't even alter his stride as he crossed the street, though he did change his course to head back toward the front part of the neighborhood. No sense showing this guy where he was going. The Chevy approached from behind him on the left, slowing ever so slightly as it passed. Nathan smiled politely and waved. Todd waved back. The kid looked normal enough. As he accelerated toward the end of the street, Todd's thoughts turned to the proposal he was making in a few hours. He never even looked back in the mirror. As the Chevy drove out of sight, Nathan suppressed his urge to run. 10 minutes later, he had gained entry to 4120 through a ground-level basement window, made his way to the master bedroom, stripped down to his borrowed undershorts, and fallen fast asleep. Kendra and Steve Nicholson hadn't spoken to each other in the last 100 miles. It had been Steve's idea to drive straight through for their return from Disney World, thinking it better to get the driving and the attendant whining from the kids out of the way in one endless marathon. Kendra had reached her breaking point in South Carolina and had just stopped talking. Now, as Steve piloted the Range Rover into their driveway and pressed the visor-mounted garage door opener, he recognized that something was wrong, but it was Kendra who spoke his thoughts. "Where's the car?" she gasped. Harry Tompkins actually watched the digital display on his wrist count up the last 60 seconds to 10 o'clock. Just 4 more hours of agony until his meeting with Lieutenant Michaels, at which time he was certain that his career would come to a disgraceful end. His assignment, until further notice, was to sit in an unmarked car out in front of Mark Bailey's house. No one had seen the elusive Uncle Mark since his nephew's disappearance. Harry watched as a red Bronco nosed into the driveway and parked. Out of the car came a man who matched Mark Bailey's description. He had a huge bandage on his hand, and he moved as though he were in considerable pain, every motion slow and deliberate. Harry slipped out of the car and jogged across the street. "Excuse me," he called. "Mr. Bailey." Mark turned at the sound of his name, then quickened his pace toward his front door. Before he could take 3 steps, Harry was next to him. "I want to ask you a few questions. Where have you been all night, sir?" "I've been in the hospital all night." He gestured delicately with his mangled hand. "I had a bit of an accident. A car fell on me while I was working on the brakes." "Are you aware that your nephew escaped from the juvenile detention center night before last?" "I said I was in the hospital, not a cave. Yes, I'm aware." The realization of Harry's suspicions hit Mark suddenly, and he smiled broadly. "Are you thinking that I might have Nathan here?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "Should I be thinking that?" he asked. Mark tossed back his head and laughed loudly, genuinely amused. "Not if you know anything about Nathan and me. My nephew and I hate each other. I sent him away, asked him to be jailed, mainly just to get rid of him. This is the last place Nathan would go." As they conversed, Harry edged toward the door. "Then you wouldn't mind letting me in to look around, would you?" "Actually, I would," Mark said coolly. Harry smiled the way a poker player smiles when he's caught bluffing. "Fair enough, Mr. Bailey," he said. "But there's one more thing. You said a car fell on your hand. Where did that happen?" "Right at the end of my arm." Mark disappeared inside the house and the door closed behind him. Harry turned his head to face the house and the Bronco in the driveway. Had to hurt like hell to have a vehicle that size fall on your hand. Now wait a minute. There's only one car here. If it fell off its blocks, who put it back together for him to drive to the hospital? No doubt about it. Mark Bailey was guilty of something. Whatever it was, it had something to do with his injury. Harry checked his watch again and was relieved to see he still had 3.5 hours left in his career. He thought he'd spend part of it down at the hospital. Maybe one of the ER docs would know something helpful. Michaels was the first investigator to arrive at the Nicholsons' house, just behind the satellite van from a local television station. As Warren approached the front door, he recognized a familiar face. "Good afternoon, Officer Borsuch," he said as he approached. "Dispatch tells me you think the Bailey kid was here." "Well, I wish I could say it was brilliant detective work, Lieutenant," Borsuch said good-naturedly as he led Michaels down the main hallway. "But it was really pretty easy." He handed over a piece of lined notebook paper. "He left a note?" Warren asked, incredulous. It took him less than 15 seconds to read it. "I'll be damned," he said when he was finished. "Are we sure this isn't some red herring? Have we checked the facts?" Borsuch nodded. "From what we can tell so far, he's telling the truth. The most polite burglar in history." Harry Tompkins stopped at hospital trauma desk, where a young physician's assistant was filling out some paperwork. I need to speak to the doctor who treated a patient named Mark Bailey yesterday. Hand injury, right? That would be Dr. Baker." "Tad Baker? You know him?" Harry shrugged. "Everybody knows Dr. Tad." Harry found him putting stitches into the back of a patient's head. "Afternoon, Dr. Tad," he said as he approached. Tad looked up from his work and smiled. "Well, if it isn't Braddock County's finest. I've got some questions to ask you." "All right, then. Just let me finish up here, and I'll be right with you." When he was done, he walked with Harry into the privacy of an empty trauma room. "What's up? Did you work on a patient named Mark Bailey yesterday?" Harry asked. "He had a broken hand." Yes, he certainly did," Tad confirmed, growing visibly uncomfortable. "Harry, you know I can't discuss the details of patient histories. I just need a little help, that's all," Harry said hurriedly. Did he tell you that he was injured when his car slipped a jack?" This was exactly the sort of legal pinch point that Tad worked so hard to avoid. Bailey was a scumbag, and he bore the injury of someone with evil friends. But the sad fact was that it was Harry's job to catch bad guys and throw them in jail, not Tad's. "I'm sorry, Harry. I can't help you. All my conversations with patients are privileged." "Yeah, I know," Harry said. There was an edge of desperation to his voice. "But bear with me on this. My career might be riding on it. I just want to give you some opinions of mine. If you agree, you don't say anything. But if you don't agree, you can cough. When we're done, we can both swear under oath that you never gave me any information, okay?" Tad knew that what Harry was proposing, beyond being a little childish, pushed the envelope of ethics and honesty to the breaking point. But was it any less ethical than letting a scumbag wander the streets just so you can protect your own butt? He worded his answer to Harry very carefully. "I could never agree to do that," he said, but his eyes said something else entirely. Over the course of 5 seconds, Harry's face showed dejection, followed by confusion, and finally understanding. "Yes, of course you couldn't," he said. He paused for a moment to collect his thoughts before speaking. "I think Mark Bailey is lying about how he got injured." Tad said nothing. "I think he's afraid that we're going to find out what really happened to his hand." No response. "I think he broke his hand while he was committing a crime, and that he's afraid if we find out about the injury, we'll find out about the crime." Tad was suddenly overcome with a coughing spasm. Harry was stunned. His whole theory hinged on the assumption that Mark had somehow broken his fingers while he was helping Nathan escape. Maybe Harry had made the wrong statement. He tried again. "I think Mark Bailey was injured when he was helping someone escape from a prison." He coughed again. Harry looked thoroughly confused now, but Tad would have to let him sort it out alone. I've got patients piling up, Harry," he said apologetically. "Your theories are interesting. Feel free to share them with me at any time." With that, Tad returned to work, leaving Harry alone with his confusion. The house at 4120 Little Rocky Creek wasn't half the size of the Nicholsons' place, but a full pantry more than compensated. After wakening around 10:30, he decided to explore. Figuring that people kept the good stuff in their bedrooms, he started there. In the upper drawers of a highboy, he found the neatest kind of toys. The drawer on the left had a box of bullets. On the right was the revolver itself. It was big, blue-black, and heavy as a brick. Nathan had seen such things on TV and in the movies hundreds of times, but he had never actually handled one before. For the next 20 minutes, he did room searches the way he saw them done in Cops, with the weapon held at arm's length, gripped by both hands. With the upstairs cleared of bad guys, he took his battle to the first floor. He noticed the telephone at about the same time that he was getting bored again. He wondered what the bitch was talking about today. After hesitating for just a moment, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Nathan Bailey, are you there?" Denise asked. "Yes, ma'am," the voice said. This afternoon he sounded like the boy he was, his tone free of the burdens it carried the day before. Try not to call me ma'am, okay, Nathan?" Denise said. "I've got a reputation, you know." After they'd talked a while, Denise's voice became serious. "Nathan, I'm worried at the thought of you driving cars and running roadblocks and just being out alone at night. You're in very real danger every minute you're on the run. Sometimes I think the safest thing for you to do would be to turn yourself back in, let the justice system work for you." "The justice system got me into this," Nathan snorted. "I can't go back, Denise. I won't go back." Nathan was shouting now. "I killed Ricky Harris because he was trying to kill me. If I go back, somebody else is going to try again. And if I fight back and win, they'll call me the murderer. That's the way the system works. Don't tell me I've got to go back there because I won't do it." Nathan slammed the phone down on its cradle, then picked it up and slammed it again. He stood there in the middle of a strange living room, breathing heavily, his hands trembling. Police Officer Greg Preminger thanked Sister Elizabeth for her assistance and walked back up the stairs toward the sanctuary. Greg's daughter would be starting first grade in the fall, and he wanted to make sure that she was registered for the proper CCD classes, the Catholic version of Sunday school. As he got to his car, he noticed a fire engine red BMW convertible parked way off in the back of the parking lot. Nobody had said anything at roll call that morning about a stolen BMW, and there was nothing on his hot sheet either. He decided to let it go, but when he got back to the main road, he had a change of heart. It was just a damn suspicious way to park a good car. He returned to the Beamer and called in the license number, just in case. Patrolman Tompkins was waiting in Michael's office when Warren Michaels arrived and jumped to his feet at the sound of the opening door. "Sit," commanded Warren, in exactly the same tone he would have used for a dog. The man looked scared to death, and Warren had to bite his tongue to keep from smiling. "So, you're our radio star, eh, Tompkins?" Warren asked evenly. Harry's head snapped up and his eyes locked onto Warren. He was ready to take what was coming to him like a man. "Yes, sir," he said firmly. "Your career is important to you, isn't it, Tompkins?" Warren leaned forward and made quite a show of opening the other man's personnel file while he spoke. "Yes, sir, it is. I notice from your file here that you seem to finish first in everything that you do. That's quite an accomplishment. You should be proud." Harry shifted in his seat. The course of the conversation made him uneasy. He was expecting to get yelled at, not complimented. "I try, sir," he said. Michaels pondered the response for a long moment. "Did you cheat on your entrance exam into the academy?" "No, sir." Harry's response was instant and unequivocal. "How about all the other tests and programs you've been involved with since you got your badge? How many of them have you cheated on?" Harry's control of his anger was slipping. "None at all, Lieutenant Michaels, and frankly, sir, I resent—" "Shut up, Patrolman Tompkins. I'll thank you to answer my questions." Harry's jaw locked tightly. "Yes, sir," he hissed. "So you expect me to believe that you've performed the way you have thus far in your career by working hard and following the rules," Michaels continued. "No cheating. No shortcuts." "Yes, sir, I do. I was raised right, Lieutenant Michaels. I was always taught that if you can't get what you want by working for it, then you shouldn't have it at all. Why, then, do you have a lesser standard for the collection of evidence?" Harry looked puzzled for a moment. Then he got it. His shoulders sagged visibly as though deflated. Warren didn't need a verbal response. The body language said what he wanted to hear. "The reason we're having this little chat, Patrolman, is because you cheated yesterday, and you got caught. There is a right way and a wrong way to obtain evidence. You see this?" He held up the personnel folder. "Yes, sir," Harry mumbled. "That's my jacket." "That's right. And it's your career. It's the reason you're not out on the street looking for a job. You've had a long string of successes, Harry, and one huge fuck-up." Harry was startled to hear the lieutenant use his first name. "I'll cut to the chase. This department has a skewed memory. Fact is, one oh shit wipes out a lifetime of attaboys. You've had your oh shit, Harry. One more and I won't be able to run interference for you. Do you understand?" Warren's phone rang. "Yes, sir," Harry responded, wondering what had happened to the shouting and how he could be made to feel this badly about himself without it. As the phone rang a second time, Warren put his hand on it. "Next time I see your name in writing, I want it to be on a commendation or on the committee's recommendation for the next detective slot. You hear?" "Yes, sir." Harry braved a smile, which Warren returned. "Now, get out of here." Harry exited and closed the door. The others were right, he concluded. Michaels was one of the good guys. Michaels took the steps down to the parking lot 2 at a time, cradling his flip phone on his shoulder as he fitted his weapon into its holster. A few seconds passed, then Jed answered on the 3rd ring. "Nicholson residence, Detective Sergeant Hackner." "Jed? Warren, I just got a call. They found the car in Pennsylvania, just north of Harrisburg. I'm on my way up there now." "Great," Jed replied. "I'll cover things here." Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Stephanie Buckman was running out of important-looking tasks to consume time. The big clock in the main corridor of the courthouse read 3:40, nearly 2 hours past the scheduled time for the hearing. Petrelli never showed up, and Stephanie knew from experience that his absence meant that she was stuck with a loser. To make matters worse, her high-priced opponents from Omega Broadcasting sat smugly on the other side of the corridor, showing no signs at all of stress. Finally, at 10 minutes to 4, word came that Judge Verone was ready to begin. Judge Clarence O. Verone was notorious for running hours behind schedule. His was an appointment for life, and he could be as punctual as he liked. Now approaching his 80th birthday, Judge Verone looked cadaverous, yet for all of his physical frailties, his knowledge of the law was formidable. When the opening formalities were completed, Judge Verone turned to Stephanie Buckman. "Miss Buckman, I see you're here alone. I was expecting to see Mr. Petrelli here with you." Stephanie smiled uncomfortably. Frankly, Your Honor, so was I, but I'm prepared to proceed without him." Verone returned the smile briefly, then made it disappear. "I'm not so sure you are, Miss Buckman," he said. "I've read your petition, and I'm prepared to rule it out of order unless you can cough up a compelling reason to violate the privacy of hundreds of innocent people so you can go on a fishing trip for one caller." Stephanie glanced at her notes and began. "Your Honor, a convicted felon and a confessed killer is running free today, following a daring and bloody escape from the Brookfield Juvenile Detention Center. By allowing access to Omega Broadcasting's telephone records, you allow us to track this young man down and put him back where he belongs." "Is that all?" Verone asked. "Well, no, Your Honor. In our petition we cite several precedents, which I'd be happy to review with you." Verone held up a skeletal hand to cut her off. "No, Miss Buckman, that won't be necessary. Appearances notwithstanding, I'm still young enough to read what is submitted to this court." He pivoted his head to the defense table. "Mr. Moran, do you have any information to present to me here that is not already played out in your written response?" Verone asked. Moran smiled coyly, as though he had been waiting for this opportunity. Yes, sir, Your Honor. In addition to all of the arguments presented, the defendant feels that the entire issue is moot due to events of this morning in which the information sought by the people's petition was already provided by alternative means." Stephanie's mouth dropped. No one had told her anything about alternative means. What the hell kind of game was Petrelli trying to play, anyway? Then Morin told of the Nicholsons' return from vacation and of their discoveries upon their arrival home. Several points are proven here, Your Honor, Morin concluded. First, that good police work does not have to involve civil rights violations, and second, that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is wasting a lot of people's valuable time, and my client's valuable money, just to win a few votes. That last comment was uncalled for, Your Honor, Stephanie objected.
On the contrary, I believe that it is overdue,
Barone shot back.
Miss Buckman, I want you to go back to your office and tell Mr. Petrelli if he tries a stunt like this again, I'll throw his butt in jail for contempt. Is that clear?
Yes, sir, Stephanie said with a smile. She could just see herself saying those things to Petrelli. God, what she would give to do it and still have a job.
Petition denied.
The gun made Nathan feel safer. He'd made up his mind to take the gun with him. It could be returned once he was across the border in Canada. The laundry was finished now, and he'd already cleaned the place up. He had another note to write, but that wouldn't take long. With 3 hours to go till dark, he had nothing left to do but wait. He thumbed the power button on the remote and flopped backwards onto the couch. Nathan was the lead story on the news again. They cut to a picture of the BMW before Nathan could pick up on what the announcer was saying. A BMW sports car was recovered in a church parking lot in Jenkins Township, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles north of Harrisburg. For the details, we go to... He turned it off. What could they know? They knew he was somewhere around the town, but they couldn't know where. They'd looked for him in the woods, and they'd talked to people, showing his picture around. Could that hurt him? Oh, shit! The guy in the car! Damn! Sure as hell, they'd made eye contact. When the guy heard the news, he'd remember. Suddenly Nathan hated himself for taking stupid chances. A wave of despair overcame Nathan with such force that it took his breath away. Soon the cops would be on him, and they would send him back to that place. His darkened soul guided his eyes down to the gun in his hands. He lifted the pistol up to eye level and stared down the barrel. Death was a kind of freedom, wasn't it? He could be with his dad again and live with the angels. He could meet his mother. Nathan's lip trembled, and a single tear dripped from his chin as he pulled the hammer all the way back and brought the muzzle of the big gun up to his head just in front of his right ear. A little pressure, and it would all be over. He'd be free. He'd be happy. 1, 2... Greg Priminger was nearly bursting with pride. His discovery of the BMW had been a feat of pure police work that had already awarded him a spot on the evening news. As he traveled from door to door searching for witnesses, he allowed himself to fantasize about finding the boy as well. At those houses where no one was home, he left his card and a hastily authored information sheet on the boy. As he approached the house at 4120, he was already folding his card into the next flyer in the stack. He knocked on the door as a formality, really. He had come to recognize the look of an empty house. Nathan jumped a foot and fell to the floor at the sound of the door knocker. His first thought was that the gun had fired. Then he saw through the sheer curtains over the front window the unmistakable outline of a police officer waiting at the front door. He became perfectly still, not even daring to breathe. Jesus Christ, Nathan whispered. They found me. But the cop wasn't acting like he'd found anything at all. He peered through a cupped hand into the darkened living room. Nathan would swear that they looked right at each other. Still, there was no reaction. After perhaps 15 seconds, the cop slid one of the papers behind the screen door, then turned and walked away. For a long time, Nathan stayed frozen to the floor. He rose to his knees,
then swung himself back onto the sofa, where he allowed himself the slightest smile. They'd been 15 feet away from him, and they still missed. If it weren't for the cop at the door, he'd be dead now. Nathan let the gun slip from his hand onto the carpet, and pressing the heels of his hands to his eyes, he started to cry. Over 100 miles away, Lyle Pointer swung his Porsche onto the beltway heading north. In the uniform he wore, he looked just like a police officer. Jed had assumed that Ricky lived alone, but when he requested the key to look around the apartment, though, the manager told him that Ricky's girlfriend was still there and could let him in. Her name was Misty. In his mind, he'd pegged Ricky's girlfriend as a big-boobed bimbette with frosted hair and a Texas accent, probably worked as an exotic dancer. Jed's assumptions couldn't have been further off the mark. The woman who opened the door looked no more exotic than a grieving housewife. She was young, maybe 25, neatly dressed in a cheap short set. From a distance, she would have been attractive, but up close, her only visible feature was a deep red scar that traversed the bridge of her nose and continued under her left eye nearly to her ear. The lines of the wound were too deliberate to be anything but an intentional act of violence. She had been crying. "Are you, Misty?" Jed asked. "Mitzi," the woman corrected, shifting her eyes from Jed's face to his badge and then back again. "About time you got here." "Beg pardon?" "I said it's about time you got here. I had to hear about Ricky on television. Y'all could at least show him the courtesy of telling me in person." She stepped back and to the side, inviting Jed to enter. She slumped heavily into a sofa and gestured to a sagging lazy boy. "Take a load off," she said. "No thanks, I'd rather stand." "Were you and Mr. Harris married?" Jed asked. She shook her head and looked down. "No," she said softly. "Never meant to be, I guess." Mitzi paused for a moment, looking like she might crumble. Then she smiled again, a tired, humorless smile that seemed to be an extension of her tears. "Like my sister told me, Ricky's a man, and he was willing to take me in. With my face..." Her voice trailed off. "All things considered, he was a good man." "Did Ricky have anything to do with..." He aborted the question. There was no way to phrase it that would not seem brutish. Mitzi let him off the hook. "My face? Oh, heavens, no. This was a gift from a boyfriend I dumped back in high school. Said he'd make me so ugly nobody else would ever want me. It worked, too. Until Ricky." "I need to ask you a few questions." "About Ricky?" "Yes, ma'am." "He's not just an innocent victim, is he?" The directness of the question caught Jed off guard. Actually, that's what we're trying to find out. Did Ricky ever mention Nathan Bailey to you?" Jed asked. Tears flooded Mitzi's eyes again as she leaned forward in her seat. "You know, I've asked myself that question 1,000 times today, trying to remember the name, but it's just not there. I'm sorry." "You know, then, that Nathan had said some uncomplimentary things about Mr. Harris. What do you think about that?" "I wish I could tell you that killing one of those little bastards would be totally out of character for Ricky, but I can't. You know, I think he was planning something for a long time. I never put it together until right now." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. You couldn't possibly. Beginning a couple of weeks ago, I noticed things missing from the house. Ricky's clothes. When I do laundry, there'd be a few less underwear to fold. It was kind of like he was moving out of the apartment a little at a time. At first I figured it was another woman, but then he always came home at night, and he started drinking again. Over the past few weeks, it got really bad. Looking back, putting it together with the plane ticket, I guess now I think he was trying to deal with something. Whoa. Jed cut her off. What plane ticket? Well, that's the biggest mystery of all. About, a week ago, I found a plane ticket hidden in one of his shoes in a closet. One way to Argentina, paid for in cash. $900. I can't imagine where he came up with that kind of money. I never said anything about that either, because I kept telling myself that maybe he was planning some kind of surprise getaway for the two of us.
Was there a second ticket for you as well? Mitzi answered by looking away again. Where's the ticket now? Jed pressed.
No clue. The shoes and the ticket both joined the list of missing stuff.
Jed took a full minute to jot notes into his little book. Then he spoke. I just need to clarify one last point. You said you realize now that Ricky had been planning something for a long time. What exactly do you think he was planning?
She shook her head. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe it was to kill that boy. Maybe it was to do something else. Whatever it was, I guess it was bad enough to make him leave the country. And me.
Todd Briscoe hadn't so much as thought about the boy he'd seen until he heard the news on the radio on his way home. Could it be that the kid they were looking for was the same one he had seen? When he spoke to his wife from his car phone about his suspicions, she told him that the police had left a picture of the boy at the house. When he got home, Patty handed him the flyer with Nathan's picture on it before he had a chance to put down his briefcase.
Is this him? She asked anxiously.
The eyes in the grainy picture. Those eyes bore the same deer-in-the-headlights look as the kid he had seen. And the hair was the same.
This is him, Todd said. We've got to call the police.
At last it was dark, and time for Nathan to continue his journey. In a flash of inspiration, Nathan had used electrical tape to change the 1s on the Honda's license plates to 4s. The Honda started up on the first turn of the key. Once out of the garage, he coasted down the driveway. His heart jumped. 3 police cruisers, traveling bumper to bumper with their blue lights flashing, slid the turn into the neighborhood, speeding off down the street he'd just traveled. Nathan figured that the guy from that morning had finally made his phone call. After Todd Briscoe made the identification, Greg turned to the other police officers who had gathered in the front hallway. Okay, let's go door to door and find him. As he approached the front door, he realized that he hadn't asked the most important question of all. Mr. Briscoe, do you know if any of your neighbors are on vacation this week? The Grimeses up the street are on vacation, he said. 4120 Little Rocky Creek looked no different from the other houses in the neighborhood, except Greg remembered this as the one at which he had been compelled to look through the front window, having sensed, really, motion through the sheer curtains. Inside the house, Greg found a note on the kitchen table signed by Nathan Bailey. The good news was that this was the right house. The bad news was that they had missed the kid. The note apologized for breaking in and assured the homeowners that he'd done the laundry for them. It went on to say how badly he felt that he had to steal their car and that, oh, by the way, he now had a gun. Greg lifted his portable radio and keyed the mic. According to the last report from the Pennsylvania boys, Nathan Bailey was armed and dangerous, and driving the Honda that Sheriff's Deputy Chad Stedman had been following for the last 12 miles. The driver certainly looked short enough to be a kid, and the job he had done on the license plates wouldn't fool anybody. Stedman's radio crackled to life. Command 6, Baker 15. I'm at Halsey Road and Route 168. Sergeant Watts,
Stedman's boss said. "What's your 1020 from that location?" "That'd be about 1.5 miles, Command 6. "All right," Watts said. "We'll make our stand here. I'll set up a roadblock. Treat this as a felony stop." "Baker 15's okay," Stedman acknowledged. As they approached the site of the roadblock, Stedman, with Schmidt coming in behind him, would hit their lights and sirens and wedge the Honda into a triangle of vehicles from which there would be no escape. If things went well, no one would get hurt. But if the little bastard did anything funny, he'd be no shit forever dead. Nathan's heart dropped when he saw the second set of headlights in the mirror. That was no child molester following in the car behind. That was a cop. His mind raced for a way out. Whatever they were going to do, he sensed it would happen soon. There it was, a roadblock. About 100 yards ahead, a cop car was crossways in the street, its blue and red lights sweeping the buildings around it. For just the slightest instant, he took his foot off the gas, but then he realized that to keep hope alive, he had to keep moving. He jammed the gas pedal to the floor. Stedman couldn't believe what he was seeing. "A son of a bitch is running!" he shouted into his mic. But there was no place to go. Watt's cruiser had completely blocked the roadway, leaving only a foot between his back bumper and the 4-inch curb. Nothing could get through that space. Stedman thumbed his mic again. "Christ, Sarge! He's gonna ram you!" Even as he approached the cop car blocking his path, Nathan didn't know where he was going to go, except that somehow he was going to get past it. The distance closed with frightening speed as the Honda's speedometer passed 50. More by instinct than by conscious thought, with less than a dozen yards to go before impact with the police cruiser, Nathan gallumped the Honda over the curb, the transmission making a horrendous crashing sound as it dragged itself along the concrete. The car went airborne for just an instant, and then crashed back down onto the grass on all 4 wheels. He didn't even see the shotgun before it discharged. 9 .32 caliber pellets mauled the rear window, shredded the passenger seat and headrest, and then went on to blast out the windshield. He had no time to regain his bearings before he was back on the flat street, with the roadblock getting smaller behind him. He stepped on the gas, but the car did not respond. The Honda was slowing. The speedometer crossed 25 on its way down to 0. He jammed the brake, and the Honda jolted to a stop in the middle of the road. "I'll do it on foot if I have to," he declared silently. But Stedman was on him before he could reach for the door handle. 2 sets of hands descended on him, dragging him out of the car through the shattered side window, and he felt the rounded shards of glass embedding themselves into the flesh of his arms and his legs and his belly. When he was free of the window, they slammed him to the pavement. A booted foot on his jaw pressed his face into the pavement, while a knee drove deeply into the small of his back. Nathan pleaded for mercy while the police officers bent his arms back at impossible angles to handcuff him. "Please, don't hurt me any more," Nathan begged. "I promise I'll do what you say." "You already blew that chance, asshole," the cop replied. The cops lifted Nathan to his feet. His nose was bleeding freely. A third officer approached. He wore a gold tag that read Watts. When Nathan admitted to being the Nathan Bailey, Watts drove a nightstick into the boy's testicles. As Nathan cried out in agony and collapsed like a marionette onto the street, Watts grumbled, "That's the first penalty for killing a cop. Get this dog turd out of here." During the 12-mile trip to the police station, Nathan never moved. He just lay on his side, knees up, waiting for hope to return. Pointer had planned to mingle with the cops around Jenkins Township, masquerading as a police officer from Braddock County. Sooner or later, he'd hear something. The reality proved to be much simpler. Around 3 a.m., as he was checking into the Spear and Musket Motor Lodge, the only hotel in Jenkins Township, Pointer's attention was drawn to the special report graphic on the desk clerk's 10-inch TV. The screen filled with Nathan Bailey's picture, overlaid with the words, "In custody." A delighted announcer reported that the nation's most famous fugitive had been apprehended by police in Pitcairn County, New York. Without a word, Pointer turned on his heel and left. If he hustled, he could be there in a couple of hours. By the time they arrived at the station, the agony in Nathan's groin had dulled to a throb, and his nose had stopped bleeding. Stedman unlocked the front door to the station. With Watt's participation in the chase, the shift had been stripped clean of personnel, leaving no one behind to watch the store. Stedman led Nathan directly to a detention cell at the end of the hall. The hallway sloped noticeably downward toward two heavy wooden doors. As they approached, the temperature dropped an easy 15 degrees, and the humidity seemed to top the scale. The only objects in the cell were an ancient canvas-on-wood army cot and a toilet. Stedman released Nathan's handcuffs and closed the door behind him. Jesus, it was cold in there. Nathan carefully grabbed a corner of the wool army blanket from the cot and shook it open, checking for bugs. There were none. Wrapping the blanket around his shoulders, he sat on the edge of the cot, which promptly collapsed under his 83 pounds. One of the wooden legs had been booby-trapped to look whole. The impact with the concrete floor shook his various injuries to life. This time, he couldn't stop the tears. Dickheads. Sergeant Watts finished his report on Nathan's capture at 4:30 in the morning. The sound of the lobby door opening startled him. Visitors were rare at this hour. In this case, it was another cop, wearing a uniform Watts didn't recognize. "Good morning," Pointer said cheerily. "I understand there was some excitement here last night." Watts smiled proudly, despite the inexplicable bad feeling he had about this guy. Yes, sir. We got the bad guy. How can I help you?" "My name's Robertson," Pointer lied. "I'm with the Braddock County PD. The Bailey kid's from my beat. Just here to help out, maybe take him back to Virginia after extradition." He glanced around the lobby. "Looks like a pretty slow night." Watts shrugged and looked down at his papers. "Except for me and the kid, the place is empty." Even as he said the words, he sensed that he had done a bad thing. By the time he saw the stranger's arm swing up to shoulder height, the bullet was already on its way. What was that? Nathan was startled from near sleep by a strange noise, followed by the loud clatter of falling furniture, and then silence. Something definitely was going on. He could hear odd movements out front, a moaning sound. This couldn't be happening to him. The nightmare just wouldn't end. The giant keys to the detention cells sat heaped on the desk in clear view, in front of 3 security camera monitors. Pointer smiled and shook his head. These hayseeds have no idea what security means, he thought. Another 2 minutes, and he'd be done. The sound of approaching footsteps confirmed Nathan's worst fears. Whoever this guy was, he wanted Nathan dead, badly enough that he was willing to kill a cop to do it. "Nathan!" a voice sang from the hallway. It was the most frightening sound Nathan had ever heard. He needed a weapon. There had to be a weapon. The bed. Nathan darted 2 quick steps to the cot and snapped free the broken leg. It wasn't very big, but it was heavy. A key slipped into the lock in the heavy door. Clunk. Nathan dashed silently back to the hinges, using the door's huge wooden panels as a shield. He saw the gun first. It came in quickly and made the turn, as though the intruder knew exactly where he was hiding. Nathan brought the cot leg down with both hands in a giant overhead arc onto the gun. It was the hardest he had ever swung at anything in his life, and it felt every bit as though he had impacted concrete. The pistol clattered to the concrete, but didn't go off. He recoiled for a second blow, but checked his swing when he saw that his attacker was a cop. Pointer sensed the hesitation and saw his opportunity. He lunged at the boy. Nathan got in a second shot, but it glanced off the man's shoulders just enough to unbalance him a bit. Nathan used the momentum for another home run swing to the side of his attacker's knee. Pointer went down with a snort, but never broke eye contact. With the speed of a striking rattlesnake, Pointer snatched the gun into his hand and brought it around, preparing to shoot through the A-frame of his armpit. Nathan saw it coming and two-handed the makeshift baton down onto the back of Pointer's head. He collapsed. Nathan had to get out. Again, he had to run. Again. The hallway was clear, the doors all open. To his right, he glanced at the bloody heap on the floor. Nathan didn't even slow his stride as he dashed out into the waiting night. Jesus Christ! The exclamation startled Pointer back to consciousness. His head felt like someone had lit a fire behind his eyes. That fucking kid! Sarge! Oh my God! Schmidt's voice was nearly a sob. He drew his weapon and chambered around. "Stedman!" he called. "Stedman! Are you here?" Pointer reoriented himself in an instant and formulated a plan. The new addition to the evening's cast was an unwelcome intrusion, but Pointer could handle it. He needed to draw the new cop into the cell somehow. Pointer groaned loudly. Schmidt ran the distance to the open cell in seconds and swung into the doorway, crouched into a two-handed shooting position. His expression said it all. "Who the hell are you?" Pointer sat propped up against the far wall, his head lolling against his chest. He moaned again for effect, even as he noted the bulge of the cop's chest protector through his uniform shirt. Head shot, it is, Pointer thought. The tension drained visibly from Schmidt's shoulders as he straightened and approached his fellow police officer. The moment Schmidt holstered his weapon, Pointer brought his to bear. The bullet entered Schmidt's head squarely at the crease of his lips and sent him sprawling backwards into the hallway. "Brilliant police work," Pointer chided. Pointer was surprised by the effort it took to rise to his feet. Goddamn kid was slippery. Mr. Slater was not going to be happy. He had to turn this all around somehow. Everyone deserves a second chance, but no one deserves a third. As he stared at the uniformed body in the corridor, the outline of a plan began to form in his mind. "You've been a bad boy, Nathan," he said. Billy Alexander was the only kid in Mrs. Lippincott's fourth-grade class who hated summer vacation. At school, there was always something good to eat, and there were friends to play with, and air conditioning to dry up the sweat. Billy's apartment, on the other hand, was a sweat box. His mom worked all the time, and often he'd be stuck picking through whatever was left in the cupboards. The very worst part, though, was the loneliness. At 10, Billy was the youngest kid in his building by about 6 years, and the only one who wasn't a doper or a crackhead. Billy knew that his life sucked, but he figured if he actually learned all that crap they were teaching him in school, and if he just stayed away from the other kids from his neighborhood, maybe, just maybe, he could be different. Black folks had done it before. Colin Powell had done it, and Colin Powell was his hero. So, summertime was something he had to endure. He had his books, and he had his television, and it wasn't like he was starving to death or anything. Most important, he had his best friend, Barney, a golden retriever that Billy had found in an alley. For both boy and dog, it had been love at first sight, and they'd been inseparable for nearly 3 months now. At the moment, Billy was doing the one chore that he hated above all others, taking the trash downstairs. The basement of his apartment building was a dark, damp, stinky place where people who had no homes would go to camp out or shoot up. As always, he let Barney go down first to flush out whatever bad guys might be lurking. Dutifully, the beast trotted on down, then Billy followed. That's when he heard some boxes move in the corner. Barney heard it too. The ferocious noise that issued from the dog's throat was unlike anything Billy had ever heard. Who's there?" Billy called out. Whoever you are, you better come out before my dog kills you." Boxes and trash bags fell away from the stack in the corner and tumbled to the floor, revealing a terrified white boy who slowly rose to his feet. "You're Nathan, aren't you?" Billy said. Nathan nodded and swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the angry beast. I won't hurt anybody," Nathan declared. "You killed those guys." Nathan shook his head frantically, never moving his eyes from the snarling mutt. No, I didn't, honest. I don't know what's happening, but I'm not the one. Look, could you, the dog..." Billy hesitated for a few seconds, then stooped down to rub Barney's ears. "Be cool, Barney. Let's hear what the dude has to say for himself." "How come you know who I am?" asked Nathan. Billy snorted out a chuckle. "Everybody knows who you are. You were on Nightline last night." "What'd they say about me?" Billy shrugged. "Half the world thinks you're a murderer, and the other half thinks you're some kind of hero." "I'm no hero," Nathan said, shaking his head. "But I'm no murderer either." "Until this morning, I might have agreed with you, bro. But those 2 dead cops they found last night didn't keel over from heart attacks." Nathan scowled. "What?" Billy explained. Nathan gasped and sank slowly to the floor. He ran a hand through his greasy hair. "Oh, shit. They think I did all that?" Billy nodded. "Yep." A long silence followed. "What you gonna do next?" Billy finally asked. Nathan studied the other boy before answering. "I don't know. Can I hide in your place for the day?" Billy's answer came easily, as though he'd been anticipating the request. "Sure, why not?" he said. "Don't got much to eat, but we got a TV and I got some games and stuff." Nathan winced. Watching TV's gotten pretty depressing for me recently." Billy laughed again. "I'll bet." By the time Warren arrived at the Pitcairn County Sheriff's Office, the place was a media circus. His gold badge granted him unimpeded access into the building, through the crowds of reporters and citizens. The first face he saw belonged to Petrelli, who was already holding court in the hallway. This was Petrelli at his finest. Center stage, big case, hungry audience, and manufacturing facts at will. Petrelli turned to the crowd. "We all know what's at stake here. Now, let's work together to stop this animal before he can hurt anyone else." "Have we got the green light to take him out if we have to?" asked one of the deputies. "I mean, he's just a kid. I don't want to spend the rest of my career in a courtroom if it comes down to him and me and I win." Petrelli was ready. "I've said all along that I think we should treat this monster as an adult. But that's really not my call to make. Sheriff Murphy's got to make that decision."
Those men were friends of mine, colleagues of yours. A murderer took these peace officers from us in cold blood, and I have no intention of seeing him take any more. To answer your question, Deputy, yes, you have the green light. If you feel threatened, you take him out. It was what they wanted to hear. Fucker's history, Deputy Stedman said at the front of the crowd. Warren was horrified. As the group of police officers broke up and headed out to fulfill their orders, he turned to face Murphy and Petrelli, his mouth agape. Jesus Christ, Petrelli, you just issued a death warrant on that kid. Oh, for Christ's sake, Warren, don't be such a woman! Warren knew there was no use trying to talk to him. He turned his attention to Murphy. Sheriff, those men think you just authorized them to kill a 12-year-old boy. Look, Lieutenant, Murphy said, the way I look at it, if you hadn't fucked up on your end, I wouldn't have had to console 2 widows this morning. This is my case now, and I'll run it my way. Without another word, the sheriff turned and walked toward his office. Petrelli followed. God damn politicians, thought Warren. The very last thing in the world that Pointer wanted to do was call Mr. Slater. Nevertheless, the call had to be made. Is it true what they say on the news, Lyle? The old man asked when he came on the line. Is it true that you let this Bailey boy get away again? I'm, sorry, Mr. Slater, Pointer explained, surprised by the shakiness of his own voice. But, it's like this. Be quiet, Lyle, commanded Mr. Slater. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. Do you comprehend how much embarrassment you've brought down on us with your incompetent screw-ups? They'll be laughing at us. It's not like you think, Mr. Slater, Pointer offered. Shut up, the old man commanded. Now, here's what I want you to do. You leave the boy alone. It appears that the police are intent on keeping him from our grasp. I want you to come home. We have some things we need to discuss. Pointer felt himself hyperventilating, but he could not control his breathing. What about that asshole Mark Bailey? Don't you want me to... We'll take care of him. I want you to come home. I want to see you in my office this afternoon at 5. Do you understand me, Lyle? Yes, Mr. Slater. Make it easy on yourself, son, the old man instructed, an unexpected touch of kindness in his voice. Don't make us come after you. Unable to make his voice work, Pointer placed the phone gently on the cradle. He cocked his head oddly as he stared at his hands. He had never seen them shake before. Warren set up camp in an empty office where he leafed through the Polaroids of the dead officers for the 6th time. Where does a kid learn to shoot like that? How does a boy wrestle a gun from a man and still have enough composure to snap off perfect kill shots? He ran through a dozen mental calculations. Then he saw it. In a single moment of inspiration, Warren realized that they'd been looking at all the evidence surrounding Nathan's escape from the wrong angle. Even when he had allowed himself to accept the kid's version of what happened at the JDC, he hadn't seen it. Those 2 deputies were never the target of whoever shot them. They were just in the way. Nathan was in far deeper trouble than any of them had realized. Jed Hackner nearly dropped the phone when he heard Michael's theory. A hit? Jesus. Warren, are you sure? Think about it, Jed, Michael said urgently. If we assume somebody's got a contract out on Nathan, everything else falls into place. This kid is not a killer. He's just defending himself. Think about it. It's more than just the killings. How do you explain the breakdown of the video security at the JDC? Not the whole system, mind you, but just the parts that would show Ricky coming and going. And the plane ticket. Jed saw it too. What plane ticket? Jed told him about his talk with Mitzi. Warren's excitement showed in his voice. I think that pushes it over the top, he said. Somebody had to be paying Ricky Harris. So, who's going to put a contract out on a kid? Jed asked. That beats the hell out of me, conceded Warren. Do some digging into Harris. See if you can ID who's funding him." "You got it, boss." "And Jed." "Yeah?" "Get that, kid, Tompkins, involved in the investigation. After the week he's had, he could use a few attaboys." Jed smiled. "Nobody was ever that nice to us, you know." Warren laughed. "Yeah, I know. Well, if I'm wrong on this one, there'll be plenty of career mobility for all of you." "Nathan Bailey, are you there?" Denise asked when his line went live. "I didn't do it," Nathan blurted out. Denise read the panic in his voice. "Okay, kid, I believe you," she soothed. "Tell us what happened." He did. When he was done, the bitch was 15 commercials behind. The list would grow considerably longer before it began to shrink. Jed clapped Harry Tompkins on the shoulder. "The lieutenant wants us to swim upstream on this case. Wants us to prove that somebody has a contract out on the Bailey kid, that's the reason Harris tried to kill him. We've got bank records on Ricky that show a $20,000 deposit 3 weeks ago, and then a total withdrawal of all funds the morning he was killed. He wants us to show that the cops in New York were killed by a hitman, not by Nathan. We're both convinced that Nathan was the intended target." "A hitman?" Jed nodded. "Makes sense, really, if you—" "Holy shit, that's it!" Harry proclaimed, cutting Jed off in mid-sentence. "What's what?" Harry didn't answer. Instead, he picked up Jed's phone and dialed information. "Braddock Hospital, please," he said after a short pause. "Emergency department." "Hi, Harry," Tad Baker said cheerfully as he picked up. Harry was all business. "Tad, you remember our little talk the other day?" "Huh? You remember our rules of engagement. Say nothing if you agree, and—" "Yeah, I remember," Tad interrupted. "Okay, I've got one more theory for you. You ready?" Tad looked around casually. No one was within earshot. "I suppose." Harry took a deep breath. "Okay, here goes. I think that Mark Bailey's fingers were broken intentionally by someone intending to do him harm." There was a pause. Tad said nothing. "And I think that to do that, the perpetrator would have to be one sick son of a bitch, like maybe a hitman." Tad didn't say a word. "Are you there, Doc?" Harry asked at last. "Yeah, I'm here, but I've really got to go," Tad said hurriedly. "Thanks a million, Tad," Harry said, genuine affection in his voice. "Yeah, right. We're not doing this ever again." The line went dead, and Harry placed the receiver on the cradle. "What the hell was that all about?" Jed asked. "Come on," Harry said, heading for the door. "I'll explain it in the car." Jed followed without thinking. "You think the kid's uncle did all this?" "No, but I'll bet you $100 he knows who did." Lyle Pointer had endured just about as much of Nathan Bailey as he could stand. His face was everywhere, front page of the newspaper, the morning news, the evening news, every fucking place. Now the son of a whore was on the goddamn radio again. One way or another, Lyle knew that he himself was a dead man. Mr. Slater had a business to run, but if the old man thought that Lyle was just going to saunter on into a trap, well, he had another think coming. He prided himself on his sense for things like this, and he knew that the kid was close, if only he could pinpoint where. The telephone, the radio, the link was there somewhere. What was it that he'd read in the paper? Something about that witness in Pennsylvania. He worked for the phone company, didn't he? Yes, by God, he did. A plan started to form in Pointer's mind. Pointer figured it would take 5 phone calls to get the number he needed. It only took 3. and within half an hour he had managed to bully the phone number out of Todd Briscoe. As soon as Mark Bailey saw the news on television, he knew what had happened. And though he allowed himself a brief moment to feel vindicated by the failure of a professional killer to finish the job he'd paid Ricky to do, Mark knew the bottom line of what had happened last night. Pointer was not the kind to shoulder the blame himself. No, he'd want to share the glory with a friend. Upon draining the last of the bottle, Mark made a pact with himself to sober up enough to make a plan. He knew he'd be coherent again in a few hours. Meanwhile, he thought he'd engage in some serious introspection. My God, he thought, what have I become? None of it was his fault. Thinking back to the beginning, he saw that if he'd gotten the same respect from dear old Dad that his brother Steve had, then Mark would have never have had to seek quick cash. When his old man told him that his inheritance was contingent upon finishing college, Mark never thought for a moment that he was serious. But he'd been serious. Indeed, serious as a heart attack. When the old man died, his will became cast in iron, unchangeable. Steve had everything. Mark had nothing. Even Nathan got a big chunk, but not Mark. And instead of sharing, Steve invested everything in real estate and in his practice. And 2 months after the real estate market collapsed, Steve-O became Jell-O at a railroad crossing. Now that there was a new orphan in the world, Mark had naturally figured that there would be money to support him. Sure, there was that one policy for $250,000, but that went pretty fast. The real cash, he found, was in the import business. Through some friends, he came to meet people who knew people. If he could cough up $500,000 and make a trip to Colombia, he could make $5 million and be set up for life. That's where Pointer and Mr. Slater entered the picture. Mark had heard about their bank through street sources, a 30-day loan at 20% interest. But what was $100,000 when you were looking down the pipeline at $5 million? On May 27th, his hired pilot took off in a hired airplane to make the buy that would make Mark a rich man. When the son of a bitch failed to return, Mark's troubles began in earnest. 30 days to the hour after Mark had borrowed the money, Pointer showed up at his door demanding payment. Mark offered up $20,000, the last of his insurance money, as a down payment, but Pointer laughed. The beating he gave Mark lasted on and off for the better part of a half hour before the hitman said anything of substance. You know, Mark, he had said, I did a little research on you, buddy. You come from money. It pisses me off that you've got millions in the family, yet you expect Mr. Slater to believe you can't pay back a mere $600,000. Whoops! This is Thursday, isn't it? Make that $625. Now, before I rip out your windpipe, you want to tell me why you're holding out on us? It was the sight of the straight razor that made Mark think the unthinkable. Mark had remembered a clause in his father's will. Dear old Dad had established a trust of $3 million for his grandkids, of which Nathan was the only one. But there was a back door. In the event that any grandchild dies prior to his 30th birthday, the bequeathed amount shall be distributed to the child's father, or if such distribution is not possible for whatever reason, said share shall be distributed among my surviving progeny, per stirpes. Within a minute of hearing about the backdoor clause, Pointer had developed a plan. Mark would be allowed to live a while longer, for the sole purpose of killing his nephew and taking delivery of the inheritance money. Pointer, meanwhile, would shelter Mark from the wrath of Mr. Slater in return for a $200,000 fee. The details were left up to Mark. Recognizing that details can be expensive, Pointer had even returned the 20 grand down payment. The rest had been shockingly simple. Mark found Ricky by following the guards as they left the JDC and gathered at the Woodbine Inn for drinks. Mark bought Ricky a drink. Over the course of the evening, Mark bought him a lot of drinks. It was nearly midnight when Mark made his pitch. All Ricky had to do, he explained, was kill the kid and skip out of the country. As luck would have it, 20 grand was more money than Ricky Harris had ever seen in one place, and when he found out that the target was that pussy Bailey, he seemed thrilled. And so it had started. As Mark now sat alone in the sweltering heat of his house, he marveled at just how wrong everything had gone. The stack of legal sheets strewn on the table served as yet another monument to his shitty life. He was pulled from the past by a knock at his front door. He was frightened at first until he realized that it was impossible for Pointer to have gotten back so soon. As he swung the door open, a large man stood silhouetted against the brilliant white background. "What do you want?" Mark demanded. The man stepped in without being asked. "I came to talk to you, Mark," the man said. "Mr. Slater sends his regards." The first thing Jed noticed about Mark Bailey's untidy little house when he and Harry drove up was the drawn curtains. They gave the structure a haunting, abandoned look. Jed knocked loudly and yelled, "Mark Bailey! Police officers!" Still nothing moved. After trying the knob, they kicked in the door. "Check out this level," Jed instructed. "I'll go upstairs." They split up, and even as they parted, Jed knew what they would find. There is a smell to death, a thick, sweet odor. Mark Bailey's house reeked of it. Jed had just reached the top of the stairs when Harry called out from the living room. "Oh, shit!" shouted Harry, clearly unnerved. "Oh, Christ, Sergeant! I found him. He's in the living room. He's dead." "Bad guy gone?" he asked, inwardly amused by the fear on the young cop's face. Harry nodded. "Yeah," he said. "The place is clean. Oh, look at him, though. Oh, it's disgusting." "Yeah," Jed agreed as he surveyed the body. "He sure as hell pissed somebody off." Mark Bailey's body was tied rigidly into a dining room chair. A long finger of extruded brain tissue extended like a ponytail from a ragged hole in the crown of his skull. Both arms dangled limply at his sides. The cast had been removed from Mark's right arm, and his purple, swollen fingers were twisted at horrifying angles. Jed used the phone to call for the Criminal Investigative Unit and the coroner. While he waited on the line, he surveyed the house. His eyes wandered to a sheaf of papers, legal documents he recognized from the numbered lines and exaggerated indentations. There it was, on the front, the last will and testament of somebody named William Stephen Bailey. He thumbed through the pages. Something underlined caught his attention, and his mind shifted from scanning mode to reading mode. Halfway through the second paragraph, his backbone straightened. "I'll be damned," he said aloud. "What have you got?" Harry asked. "Our motive," Jed said sharply. "So, let me get this straight," Sheriff Murphy summarized after listening to Warren's presentation. "You want me to go before the voters of this county and tell them that on the advice of a police detective from Virginia, I should ignore all the physical evidence gathered thus far, not the least of which is an admission of guilt from the kid himself, and shift our efforts to find a phantom hitman. Is that what you were telling me, Lieutenant Michaels?" Warren scanned the faces of the sheriff and Petrelli. This was a useless exercise, he realized. To these two, police work was about votes. There's nothing more. He knew when he'd lost. There was nothing left for him to do. As he turned to leave, the phone rang, and he heard Murphy answer and pass it to Petrelli. "What the hell are you talking about?" Petrelli exploded. I did no such thing. Warren stopped short of the door to eavesdrop. Seeing Petrelli blow his cool always lightened his day. "Look, Stephanie," he said after listening. "I'm telling you I didn't call. Do you think I have a death wish? Judge Verone would have my butt in jail before nightfall." The pieces fell together for Warren. Stephanie would be Stephanie Buckman, who had represented Petrelli's ridiculous petition before Judge Verone the day before. When it all focused in his mind, Warren's heart started racing. Somebody was trying to trace Nathan's call. Warren moved quickly back across the office and snatched the telephone away from Petrelli. J. Daniel looked shocked at the lieutenant's strength. "Stephanie, this is Warren Michaels," he said hurriedly. "I understand that somebody was trying to trace Nathan Bailey's telephone call." Stephanie's voice showed surprise at the sudden change in characters. "Well, yes," she stammered. "Did he get it?" Yes, but what? How long ago?" Warren interrupted. I don't know for sure. 20 minutes, maybe." "Shit! What's the number?" he asked. "Lieutenant, what happened to Mr. Petrelli?" she stalled. "No one knows for sure," Warren said, without missing a beat. "We think he was born an asshole. Look, Stephanie, I need that number. The guy who was asking for it is our killer. Please, tell me what it is." With more than a little hesitation, she gave him the number. As soon as the 7th digit passed Stephanie's lips, Warren dropped the phone onto its cradle. Without a word, Warren left Murphy's office, dialing his cellular as he walked. Having been so terribly unnerved at first, Nathan seemed to have calmed down a lot. After nearly 2 hours on the phone with him, all Denise really knew for sure was that he was convinced that he was the target of a police conspiracy to kill him, and that he had had nothing to do with those officers' deaths the night before. Suddenly, a stranger joined them on the line. "Excuse me," the voice said. "This is the telephone operator with an emergency break-in call from Lieutenant Michaels from the police department. Go ahead, sir." There was a click, and then Warren's voice joined the conversation. "Nathan, this is Lieutenant Michaels from the Braddock County Police Department," he said. Wait a minute, Lieutenant," Denise protested. "How did you break in?" "I'll be happy to explain all the details to you later, but right now Nathan is in grave danger. Son, you need to run away from where you are. Now, the man who tried to kill you last night is on his way to do it again." Nathan turned pale. How do I know you're not trying to trick me?" "You don't," Warren answered simply. "You'll just have to trust me." Denise blurted, "Trust? You break into a private conversation against court orders," I hastened to add, "and you talk about trust? It seems to me—" Warren cut her off. "Nathan has no choice but to trust me. If he doesn't, he'll get killed, and there's nothing I can do about it. Believe it or not, son, I am one of the good guys. Now, run!" "Where to?" the boy asked, desperation building in the pit of his stomach. There was only one landmark Warren could think of, and it was out in the middle of everything, the obelisk in the town square. "Can you, take us off the air for just a minute, bitch?" Warren asked, his tone pleading and polite. Denise heard the sincerity in the police officer's voice, the fear. "All right," she agreed. "Go ahead, guys," Denise instructed. "Your clock is running. Let's go to commercials. Rick?" As Nathan listened, he felt his world becoming very small, just himself and this cop named Michaels. During the first 10 seconds of the monologue, Nathan learned that there was a plot to kill him, and that it didn't involve the police. In the next 10, Nathan heard that most of the police on the street thought that he had killed the cops in the jail last night, and that they were cleared to shoot him if he resisted arrest. Finally, he learned that the most important thing that he could do was let Michaels bring him in. "The running's over, Nathan," Michaels concluded. "You have to trust somebody now, and I'm all you've got. Do you know where the Lewis and Clark Memorial is in the square?" You mean the tall, pointy tower?" Nathan said. "Yeah." "Make your way over there, and we'll find each other. I'm wearing a brown suit with a blue shirt and a striped tie. You'll see me. I look like a cop." Nathan hung up the phone and looked at Billy. "Well, do you trust him?" Billy asked. Nathan thought for a moment before answering. Yes. The answer surprised both of them. Nathan smiled sadly. "Thanks, Billy," he said. "You didn't have to help me. I appreciate it." Billy looked down at the floor. "Sure I did," he joked half-heartedly. "You're a murderer. You might have killed me." He reached into his pants pocket and handed the older boy a 3-inch tall X-Men figure, Cyclops. "Here," he said. "He brings me good luck." Nathan took the toy gratefully and stuffed it into the front pocket of his ragged denim shorts. "Thanks," he said, and disappeared out the apartment door. He'd taken 3 steps down the hall when he heard the pounding of running feet behind him. "Hey, Nathan!" a voice called. Nathan's body reacted to the sound of the voice even before his brain could process its source. He sprawled face first onto the stained carpet of the hallway just as he heard the familiar and a tiny geyser of plaster fountained from the wall. Nathan caught a glimpse of his attacker through his peripheral vision. He was dressed in a cop's uniform. Nathan never stopped. He charged down the hallway. Only 50 more feet, and he'd be at the stairwell door. 20 feet now, and the pounding of his own footsteps was joined by the heavier stride of the cop. When he heard Pointer's footsteps stop abruptly, Nathan knew he was in trouble. He zigzagged the last 10 feet to the exit. He heard the suppressed gunshot. At the same instant, an invisible fist slammed into the right side of his rib cage, and a neat, round hole appeared in the metal door 3 inches in front of him. He'd been shot. He staggered as he propelled himself through the fire door. Nathan didn't run down the stairs. He flew down them, using the steel railings to vault from one landing to the next, barely touching a single concrete step on the way. Nathan plowed through the exterior door and sprinted across the street toward a schoolyard. He could hear sirens. Petrelli called Stephanie back, and within minutes they'd matched the telephone number to its address. Sheriff Murphy had dispatched all available units to take Nathan Bailey into custody. Just as moths are drawn to light, television news crews were drawn to the sounds of the sirens. Those who'd been monitoring the police scanner knew that they were making their move on the Bailey boy. Those who'd been monitoring the bitch knew that he'd be gone when they arrived. What no one knew for sure was where he was going to go. News vans joined the fleet of cop cars as they tried to close in on the fleeing boy. Overhead, news choppers followed the action from the air. CNN was already showing live footage, even though there was nothing more to show than a lot of marauding police vehicles. In Washington, D.C., a tiny television had been brought into the bitch's studio so that Denise could track the events as they unraveled. She was prepared to give a play-by-play rundown to her audience regarding what was going down. Once he'd reacquired his prey, Pointer moved through the crowd like a torpedo racing toward its target. He walked swiftly without running, steadily closing the distance between Nathan and himself. They were about 50 yards apart now, separated by just enough people that he couldn't take a clean shot. The kid moved smoothly, clearly wanting to avoid being recognized, and clearly unaware that Pointer was so close. The hitman had decided to play the takedown as an arrest rather than just popping him on the street. Then events took yet another unexpected turn. Nathan was getting close. He could see the obelisk in the distance now, rising above the heads of his fellow pedestrians. Then someone grabbed him from behind in a crushing bear hug. "It's all over now, kid. I gotcha." "Let go of me!" Nathan yelled. He kicked wildly and wiggled in every direction. As the man's grip weakened, Nathan started to slip through his grasp. When Nathan drove the back of his head into the man's nose, he let go completely and staggered backwards. Nathan landed on his feet. "Just hold it right there, Mr. Bailey," a voice said from behind. The sound of Pointer's voice made Nathan jump as though zapped with electricity. He whirled around, and there the killer was, still in his police uniform, his gun drawn and pointing directly at Nathan's chest. Both of them knew that he couldn't miss at this range. The cameraman in the Action News helicopter was the first to notice the activity on the ground, about a block and a half from the square. When he zoomed in with his big telephoto lens for a better look, he saw that an arrest was being made. "They've got him, Paul!" the cameraman shouted into the intercom. "They've got the kid! I'm getting the arrest on tape! Tell the network, we've got a live feed of the arrest!" A patrol car spotted Michaels at the base of the memorial. Sheriff Murphy's plan was simple enough. Find Warren Michaels, keep an eye on him, and sooner or later they'd have Nathan Bailey in custody. From the way the lieutenant had been acting, it only made sense that he'd arrange a meet. And after Petrelli had explained the business about Michael's son, the intense protective streak made sense as well. Clearly the man had lost perspective. Or such was the message delivered to Deputy Chad Stedman. Now codenamed Sniper 1, he'd been dispatched to commandeer a corner office on the third floor of a professional building across from the Lewis and Clark Memorial. From there, he would have a clear view of the area around the obelisk. Stedman double-checked to make sure the safety was on before bringing the crosshairs to bear on Michael's head. The range was 75 to 80 yards. Close enough that Stedman could put a round through the center of a dime. Though Michael's head filled the sight picture, Sniper 1 concentrated on the single spot over his eyebrow where the crosshairs intersected, the no-reflex zone. "Pow," he whispered. "Piece of cake." "He's the one! Not me!" Nathan cried as he backed toward the circle of bystanders. "He's the one who killed those policemen!" A tall man dressed in a business suit stepped forward out of the crowd. He sported a neatly trimmed white beard. Nathan saw kindness in the man's eyes. "My name's Albert Kasabian," the man said. "I'm an attorney. I think I have a solution to this problem." "So do I," Pointer hissed. "Mine is for you to stay the fuck out of the way and let me do my job." His eyes never left the boy. "I don't recognize your uniform, officer," Kasabian said smoothly. "Where are you from?" "I'm from Braddock County, Virginia," Pointer explained, "where this young man is wanted on a murder charge." Kasabian nodded pensively as though he'd been sold on Pointer's answer. "Tell you what," the attorney offered amicably. "Let's just hold what we've got here until one of our own sheriff's deputies can come and make the arrest. That way we won't have any jurisdictional improprieties." Nathan knew that right now was the best chance he'd have to make a break. He bent low at the waist, pivoted to his left, and squirted into the crowd. Pointer saw the boy disappear before his eyes and snapped off a quick shot, splintering the kneecap of the lady standing behind where Nathan had been. The hitman cursed bitterly and turned to Kasabian, firing a round into his intestines. The intent was not to kill, but to inflict maximum pain. The old lawyer doubled over and fell to the sidewalk, spewing blood and vomit onto the white concrete. Pointer brought the gun around again, and the crowd parted. In less than 10 seconds, Nathan had gained a good 50 yards. Pointer took off after him. The race was on. "Oh, my God," Denise gasped into her microphone. "The police officer has just shot 2 people. Nathan's running down the street trying to get away. The poor thing has been telling the truth." She was crying, something she'd never done before on the radio. "Run, sweetie," she begged. "Where are the real police? Damn it!" In the command van, Petrelli hovered over Murphy's shoulder as they watched the drama unfold live on television. At first, the sheriff was pleased with the news of the arrest. Then he saw the strange uniform and watched 2 voters fall to the ground, and he knew right away that Michaels had been right all along. From his position, Stedman couldn't tell where the shots had been fired, so he followed Michaels with his scope. He looked away for a moment to get oriented to the full range of vision. Stedman's heart skipped a beat when he saw a filthy, tattered boy fitting Nathan Bailey's description dart into his field of view. A uniformed cop he didn't recognize was only a few steps behind. He brought the rifle up into position and hurriedly adjusted the scope to the new range. Nathan tried to speed up, but there was nothing left in his legs. When he felt Pointer yank him back by his shirt collar, he knew that he was dead. He swung wildly with his fists as he was spun around, but stopped when a powerful backhand caught him square in the face. He heard a snap as his nose broke, and his vision disappeared in a blur of tears and blood. Warren watched as Pointer wrapped a forearm around the front of Nathan's throat and began to drag him off. Warren shouted out to the police imposter. "Police officer! Don't move!" Warren yelled, his voice breaking from the effort. Pointer reacted instantly, lifting Nathan off the ground by his chin and using his wriggling body as a shield. "Back off, pig, or I'll pop him here," Pointer yelled, bringing the magnum up to the boy's temple. His threat was barely audible above the din of the hovering choppers. "I'm not going anywhere," Michaels declared. "You let the boy go, and you live. Anything else happens, and you die." Warren tried to look menacing, but in his heart, he knew he could never make the shot without hitting Nathan. As he played out his bluff, Warren was vaguely aware of the arrival of a swarm of other police officers. In the command van, Murphy snatched the microphone away from the dispatcher. "Command to Sniper 1. What kind of shot do you have?" "Shitty," Stedman replied. "Who's my target, anyway, the police officer or the kid?" It seemed obvious enough, he supposed, but one doesn't blast another cop without being very damn sure. After a pause, Murphy answered, "It appears that the cop is your primary target, unless the kid poses a threat to somebody. Remember, he's still a killer." "Do I have a green light if I've got a shot?" "That's affirmative, Sniper 1. You have the green light if you have a shot." Stedman smiled. Finally, his moment had arrived. But the best shot he had was a terrible shot. He thumbed the safety off and settled in to await his opportunity. Then it happened. Pointer looked straight at him. Nathan knew death was coming to him, but he wasn't prepared for this much fear and pain. Noise and activity swirled all around him. None of it had form or meaning until Pointer hiked him up a little higher and growled in his ear, close enough that he could feel his hot breath on his cheek. "Say goodbye, you little shit." Nathan closed his eyes. Stedman knew it was over as soon as they made eye contact. The target hoisted his hostage higher, reducing the sight picture even more, then said something in his ear. A sick, crazy smile appeared on the target's lips, and Stedman saw movement in the muscles of his forearms. The cylinder of the magnum began to turn. Sniper 1 had exactly no time to plan his shot. He brought the crosshairs to bear just above the target's right eyebrow, the no-reflex zone, and he pulled the trigger. The shot was perfect. As millions of people watched live on television throughout the world, Lyle Pointer's head erupted in a gruesome pink cloud, and he crumpled instantly to the ground as if all his bones had suddenly disappeared. A bone-jarring impact reverberated through Nathan's body as he heard a heavy, wet thwop, followed by a sharp explosion. He screamed, dropped to the ground, certain that he had been hit. Blood was everywhere. But the pain hadn't found him yet. He suddenly became aware of an army of armed men, all in police uniforms, charging toward him. "Not again," he thought. "I'm not going to go through this again." He snatched Pointer's magnum from the sidewalk and brandished it with both hands. "Stay away from me," he screamed. "Stay away from me or I'll shoot." The blue line stopped its advance instantly, and there was a clatter of weapons as 15 police officers dropped to shooting positions. Across the street, Stedman worked the bolt on the Remington and settled the crosshairs on Nathan. "Sniper 1 to command, second target is acquired. Requesting instructions," he said into his radio. "Stand by," crackled his reply. Warren darted out in front of the others, holstering his weapon and holding his hands out where Nathan could see them. "It's me, Nathan," he said softly. "It's Lieutenant Michaels. We talked on the phone. Nathan, this is over now, son. I know what happened. I know you never meant to do anybody harm. You're not in trouble anymore, son. So just put the gun down and let's sort this all out." Nathan had been here before. He'd listened to their promises and their guarantees. He'd believed in good guys and in trust and in hope. But every time it was just another lie. All people wanted was to hurt him. And all Nathan wanted was to be left alone. "No, it's a trick," he declared. "You're going to kill me. Everybody's trying to kill me." "Nathan, listen to me," Michael said gently. "Look at me. I wouldn't hurt you for the world, son." He took a step forward. "This is over, Nathan. You've seen too much killing. Let's end it here." 3 more steps, and he was only 10 feet away. "You've got to trust somebody, Nathan. Start with me." Staring past the heavy pistol, Nathan wanted desperately to shoot, to be shot, to end it all. But even as his finger tightened on the trigger, he knew he wouldn't do it. "Let's be friends," Warren said, moving a step closer. And that was it. Nathan's lip started to quiver as he lowered the gun and let it drop to the pavement. "I don't have any friends," Nathan said pitifully, and he sank to his knees. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with tears. His features dissolved into those of a sad little boy who needed to be held. There was movement among the line of cops, but no one seemed to know what to do next. Warren watched awkwardly for just a moment, then, smoothly and slowly, with the grace of one who had done it many times before, he moved to the boy and sat down next to him on the sidewalk, self-consciously at first, but then with the warmth and tenderness of a grieving father, he drew Nathan close, his hand disappearing into the grimy tangle of the boy's hair. Amidst the blood and filth, Nathan caught the faintest aroma of sweaty aftershave, the smell of strength. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to be transported back to sunnier times. "It's over now, son," Warren said, his voice catching in his throat. "No one can hurt you now." As he pulled Nathan closer still, he rocked him gently back and forth. "It's okay," he whispered. For the longest time, they just sat there together on the sidewalk and cried like babies on national television. Alone in the quiet studio, Denise watched in silence, her fingers pressed tightly to her lips, her mascara wrecked. Enrique said something in her earphones about dead air, but she couldn't make any words come out. As the television zoomed in on Nathan and the plain-clothes cop, a tearful smile bloomed behind her hand. Finally, it was over. "Way to go, Nathan," she said into the microphone. "Here's to being a kid again."
We hope you've enjoyed this program from Harper Audio. To order additional cassettes or to receive a complete catalog of Harper Audio and Cadman titles, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. That's 1-800-331-3761. Thank you.